Chapter 260. It seemed like a long time had passed, but in reality, it was only an instant. Chun Changsheng and Zheshio broke through the surface of the lake and looked at the bathing woman who was combing her hair on the rock in the center of the lake. But in the woman's eyes, the sudden appearance of two heads on the surface of the lake was naturally an incomparably terrifying scene. Accompanied by a scream, the woman panicked and fell from the rock into the water. She choked on the lake water and floated up and down. Her beautiful face was filled with terror. The lake water swirled around her light clothes, faintly revealing the jade-like color underneath. Chen Changsheng seemed to have no time to think. He waved his arm and swam towards the place where she had fallen. Zheshio said nothing and followed behind him. When he reached the place where the woman had fallen, Chen Changsheng dove into the lake. At this moment, he naturally could not close his eyes. In the clear lake water, the woman's clothes fluttered. As she struggled, her clothes became very disheveled. He could see the white skin of her neck, and even faintly see some even more alluring places. Chen Changsheng did not react. He reached out and grabbed her. The woman had suddenly encountered help and instinctively wrapped herself around him. Like a little bear hugging a tree, she tightly hugged him. Chen Changsheng could clearly feel that his face was buried in a soft and plump area, while his waist was clamped between two extremely tight thighs. This position was very ecstatic, even in such an urgent situation. If it were a normal person, they would not be able to save anyone and would sink with them. Chen Changsheng would not. His right fist was already tightly clenched, ready to strike at any moment. It was unknown whether he was preparing to knock the panicking woman unconscious or to do something else. He carried the woman and swam towards the surface of the lake. The woman became a little more clear-headed and her fear faded a little. She also knew that Chen Changsheng had no ill intentions and had come to save her. Because of her shyness, she adjusted her position. She wrapped her arms around his neck and tilted her face. As a result, the two's faces were stuck together. Even in the slightly cold lake water, Chen Changsheng could still feel the warm breath exuded from her lips and the heat emitted from her body. Zheshio swam behind Chen Changsheng, his face expressionless as he stared at the girl. Previously, when they had emerged from the lake, he had clearly seen the insignia on the girl's belt. She should be a disciple of some hidden Eastern sect, but that didn't mean anything. He stared into her eyes, not knowing what he wanted to see. Finally leaving the lake and coming to the surface, the woman wrapped her arms around Chen Changsheng's neck and looked at Zheshio behind them. Her eyes were no longer panicked, nor were they strange. This calmness was the problem. Soon after, Zheshio saw a hint of a smile deep within her eyes. "Young lady, why are you laughing?" Zheshio wanted to ask her, but he did not, nor did he have the time. The woman's arms were wrapped around Chen Changsheng's neck, and her fingers were naturally placed below his earlobe. They were the most important blood vessels, as well as the meridians that led directly to the sea of consciousness. As long as that place was pierced through, not even the Pope himself would be able to save him. Without a sound, a bewitching green color appeared on the woman's fingertips. Even the green lake water was unable to conceal the hint of green. The green forest by the lake suddenly lost all color in front of this patch of green. The woman's fingertips lightly pierced in. Nothing happened. The smear of green on the woman's fingertips did not pierce into Chen Changsheng's neck. Chen Changsheng acted as if he had not sensed anything. He swam to the rock in the center of the lake, as if preparing to climb up. The woman's eyes rippled slightly, as if she was somewhat astonished and shocked. She slightly exerted force on her finger and pierced it again. Still, nothing happened. The woman's heart was filled with endless shock because she could not understand just what was going on. The smear of green on her fingertips was one of the sharpest magical artifacts in the world. As long as one had not reached star condensation, even a cultivator who had undergone perfect purification would be pierced by it. And that smear of green itself contained the world's most terrifying poison. Even the strongest monster, once infected by this poison, would not be able to last for too long. But why could it not pierce into Chen Changsheng's skin? Just at this moment, Chun Changsheng finally turned his head. He and the woman were extremely close, so close that they could even smell each other's breathing, see each other's eyes. His eyes were very bright, so bright that it made people panic. The woman looked at his eyes, looked at this pair of eyes that were as bright as a mirror, looked at her slightly pale face, and very rarely she felt panic. In Shuelao City, she played with countless demon generals in the palm of her hand. No matter what happened, she would not panic. But at this moment, she was very panicked. Chun Changxing's eyes were very calm, without any mockery. But she felt that he was mocking her. That pair of eyes were full of ridicule. She was very angry, very unwilling. So her eyes moved and suddenly became delicate and pitiful. Beautiful face, wronged expression, mature and soft body. In addition to her natural demon charm method, combined together, it was an extremely powerful temptation. Even if it was a man with a heart of stone, he would probably feel pity. At least he would not immediately kill her, let alone a 15-year-old youngster. As long as she could fight for a moment to turn back, then there would still be a chance, she thought. Unfortunately, the world never goes according to one's wishes, nor does it always follow the demon's will. Chun Changsheng did not have any reaction, as if he did not see her face, and was not affected by the demon's magic at all. His arms, which were holding her, slightly tightened, as hard as iron. The woman's expression changed slightly, and a shrill cry burst out from her red lips. The clothes on her body split open like a spider web. An extremely powerful aura suddenly appeared. If it was a human cultivator, the aura she released would at least be at the upper stage of ethereal opening. It was the same as Chun Changsheng, but the amount of true essence was more than 10 times more abundant. Chun Changsheng's body began to violently tremble, but he did not let go. He tightly hugged her, broke through the lake, and jumped toward the azure sky. This jump was over 100 feet high. Then, he fell towards the rock in the middle of the lake. In this extremely short period of time, he used a movement technique of discerning steps, causing his falling speed to become even faster. He hugged her, and like a stone, he smashed towards the rock. A loud bang resounded. The hard rock in the middle of the lake suddenly cracked. At least a third of the rock's surface collapsed and fell into the lake. Such an enormous force made it impossible for Chun Changsheng to hold his hands together, and he was once again sent flying into the lake. The woman was even more miserable. Her supposedly perfect demon body, under the terrifying impact, had broken several bones. Her face was pale, and 2 streams of blood flowed from the corners of her lips. Right at this moment, another shadow assaulted them. It was Zhixio. With several whooshes, the air above the rock in the middle of the lake exploded with several flashes of light. Then came cries of greed, anger, and pain. No matter how high the woman's cultivation level was, how strong her true essence was, she was still shaken by Chun Changsheng's attack, and was caught off guard, unable to block Zhixio's attack. Those flashes of light came from Zhixio's fingers. The tips of his fingers extended into extremely sharp, metallic claws, which left several deep bloody marks on the woman's naked body. As Zhixio traversed the world and hunted demons, he never needed a weapon. His weapons were his hands, and he knew better than anyone where the weakest point of a demon's body was. She sputtered from the rock in the middle of the lake. The woman gave an angry howl, and her left hand swept out, forcing Zhixio off the rock. But in that instant, her pinky finger had been cut off by Zhixio's claws. Now, Chun Changsheng had come again. The green lake water suddenly turned fiery red, as if the setting sun had descended upon this land. The evening clouds of dusk shrouded the rock in the middle of the lake. The hanging sunset of the 3 swords of Wen Shui. Borrowing the sword energy, Chun Changsheng instantly leapt from the lake to the rock. His 2 feet landed on the ground, his sword energy solidified, and with a clang, the dagger left its sheath. This was the first time the dagger at his waist had truly left its sheath. There was a crisp crack. The sunset filled the sky, and the rock in the middle of the lake was a warm red. The woman circulated her demon arts, but when her right hand was still half a foot from Chun Changsheng's throat, it could not advance any further. because her right hand had been severed, and it flew into the sky. The woman gave a wretched cry, and her body suddenly vanished. Stepping on the water, she hurriedly retreated, and with a few ups and downs, she arrived at the shore of the beach. Who could have imagined that Jushio had long since arrived on the surface of the water? With a splash of water, Jushio waved his arm. With a flash of light, a bloody line appeared on the woman's ankle, and she collapsed on the sand. Chen Chongqing's dagger pierced through the air. The woman barely managed to dodge, but Jushio flipped over and mounted her. Jushio's fingertips were pressed against her throat, the sharp tip of his claws already piercing through a piece of cartilage that was extremely difficult to find. As long as he exerted the slightest bit of force, her neck would be pierced. The woman's pupils constricted, and she did not dare to move. Only now did her severed hand fall into the lake. Only then did the line of blood that she had left behind in her retreating fall into the lake. The clear lake water, dyed in blood, became even more serene and green. The specks of blood on the sand looked like moss. Her blood was actually green. Chen Chongsheng walked out of the lake, picked up the dagger, and walked to the side of the pair. The woman was completely naked, mounted by Jushio. It seemed very alluring, but in reality, it was not because Jushio's fingertips were still stuck in her throat. Seeing the green blood flowing from the woman's severed wrist, Chen Chongsheng was a little startled. He did not remember what color the blood of that Yisher clansman he had seen in the Orthodox Academy was. This was not his first battle, but it was his first time seeing such a bitter battle, one that was truly related to life and death. He had seen blood, but he had rarely seen such a bloody scene. Most importantly, this battle was his battle, and these scenes had his reasons. He was still a youth after all. Seeing this scene, he was not used to it, so he remained silent. Jushio was very used to it, so he was very calm. The woman's face was very pale, her expression weak, and coupled with her charming appearance, it was very tempting to take pity on her. Jushio's face, however, did not have the slightest expression. The woman confirmed that these two human youths were not people that she could charm, and finally gave up. She gazed up at the azure sky, her chest rising and falling, and her beautiful face pale. The sunset glow on the surface of the lake had long since disappeared, and the sun was still in the middle of the sky. The wind from the lake blew, somewhat chilly, and the trees on the shore slightly swayed, giving rise to countless waves. Chapter 261. The woman's clothes had long since fallen into the lake during the battle. Her entire body was naked, and her satin-like skin was covered in water droplets. The cool lake breeze blew past, causing tiny particles to tremble under the water droplets. Together with her soft and undulating curves, the scene was extremely alluring. A woman lying naked on the riverbank in front of two youths was a very shameful and embarrassing matter, but her face did not have any expression, did not have any such thoughts. It was not because of the broken bones or the claws in her throat, but because of something else. This assassination had started too quickly and ended even more quickly. The changes in the middle were so fast that it seemed as if there were no changes at all. It was as if from the very beginning, Chen Chongsheng and Jushio knew everything, so everything that happened afterwards seemed to be as it should be. Only why was all this happening? Why were these two human youths able to see through her trap? Why was the peacock plume unable to pierce through Chen Chongsheng's skin? Why were these two youths so ruthless and cold, even more ruthless than her? The wolf claws were still deeply in her throat, so she could not turn her head. She could only move her eyes from Jushio's face, which was almost within reach, to Chen Chongsheng's face. The confusion in her eyes grew even stronger. They were clearly two youths that still had a childishness between their brows, so why did they possess a maturity that surpassed their age, and even cunning? She could not make a sound, so she naturally could not voice these questions. She could only express them through her eyes. As the victor, when they saw these kinds of eyes, they would often use a very gentle tone to sort out and explain the situation. This was the right and glory of the victor, but Chen Chongsheng and Jushio did not say anything. They gazed at their surroundings, remaining vigilant. They were not good at explaining, and explaining was a meaningless matter in the first place. It was just a waste of time, and wasting time was the same as murdering lives. Moreover, this matter was not over yet. The scene of you sitting in the middle of the lake combing your hair was truly beautiful, but everyone knew that there was a problem. Most importantly, we did not grasp that Principal Chin's body, for some unknown reason, was actually stronger than a perfect purification. The peacock plume could pierce through the skin of a normal star condensation cultivator, but it could not pierce through his neck. From that moment on, your defeat was fated. A voice came from the lakeside forest. The voice was very steady and gave people a very friendly feeling. It was like a big sister next door, explaining to her neighbors how the pot of red meat was made. However, Zhishio's complexion suddenly changed. He stared at the edge of the forest, at the woman's throat. The knuckles of his right hand were pale, ready to kill her at any moment. He seemed somewhat nervous. His nervousness came from the owner of the voice, but also came from the fact that the voice had mentioned the peacock plume. It made him think of someone. Chun Chongqing knew that Zhishio had an innate sensitivity towards danger and had an incomparably deep understanding of the demon race, so he very naturally became nervous. After the two of them emerged from the lake, Principal Chun used some unknown method to convince that wolf cub to let you attack. Then, while you were unprepared, he launched a counterattack. From there, he seized the initiative and displayed the speed and strength that he is most proficient in to the fullest. Zhishio, on the other hand, hid in the rear, waiting for an opportunity to attack. It must be known that the wolf is most proficient in enduring silently and then striking a fatal blow. You wanted to ambush and kill the two of them, but in reality, you were ambushed and killed by the two of them. Why was that sword so fast that it could cut off your hand? It's because the true essence attached to it was too vigorous. Your demonic charm ability was ineffective. He could not be charmed because he had the 1,000 scrolls of the Taoist canon guarding his heart. As for that wolf cub, he only has enemies in his eyes. He doesn't differentiate between men and women. The voice continued, brimming with sincere praise. Your cultivation level is above theirs, but you were suppressed by them in every aspect. Truly extraordinary children. Even I feel some fear. They are worthy of being the future of humanity that the military advisor ordered us to kill. If they were allowed to continue growing, in a few decades, who in Shualao City would be a match for them? With the rustling of grass and falling leaves, the woman who had spoken walked out of the forest. However, she was not alone. At her side was a middle-aged man. The woman had a dignified appearance and a gentle expression. She was dressed in cloth and carried an enormous iron pot in her hand. As she slowly walked over, she did not stop talking. She really was like a big sister next door. Even the most cautious person would find it very difficult to feel ill will towards this kind of person, or to be too wary. The middle-aged man had an extremely mediocre appearance and seemed extremely honest. From beginning to end, he had not said a single word. On his shoulder was a pole made of some unknown material. It was bent to an extremely exaggerated degree, but it still did not break. At the same time, this was proof of how heavy the things in his pole were. Seeing this man and woman, Zhishio's pupils suddenly constricted. His 2 feet pushed off the ground, and he quickly stood up, hiding behind Chun Chongsheng. During this entire process, his claws were still deeply embedded in the throat of the naked woman. He was not using Chun Chongsheng as a shield, but to prevent the other party from suddenly snatching him away. This meant that even if he could kill the woman with a single move, he still did not have the confidence that he would not be snatched away by this man and woman. Just who were this man and woman? Chun Chongsheng looked at the 2 horns on the middle-aged man's head. The hand holding the hilt of his sword became slightly wet. Other than the imperial family, all demons would grow a pair of demon horns upon reaching adulthood. The demon horns would grow longer with age and strength. This middle-aged man's demon horns were actually so long. Just how strong was this person? Let me introduce myself. We are husband and wife. The woman looked at Chun Chongsheng and warmly smiled. She softly said, I am called Lu Wan an Aquarius constellation. I am good at enduring, patient, kind, and careful. He is my lover. He is called Tung Xiao Ming, an azure bull constellation. His temperament is a bit slow. To put it nicely, he is steady. He likes to stay at home all day. He really is not promising. She said that he was not promising, as if she was complaining. However, her gaze towards the middle-aged man was filled with love and respect. The middle-aged man gave a simple and honest smile, but did not say anything. Chen Changsheng vigilantly stared at this couple. His lips moved slightly, and in an extremely weak voice, he asked Zhixio, who was behind him, what Aquarius azure bull. Although his voice was soft, it completely fell into the ears of the demon woman called Lu Wan. Zhixio's face was somewhat pale. He said, the connection between the star domains is a map. The demons believe that everyone belongs to a different star domain. Their destinies and personalities are restricted. This was the first time Chen Changsheng had heard of such a theory. Lu Wan smiled and said, the rarer something is, the more valuable it is. The number of stars we can see is very few, so in the secular culture, the star domains are more mysterious. In this aspect, I have always felt that the behavior of you humans is somewhat lacking. You always wish that this world did not have a sacred moon. Chen Changsheng thought that if he was not well-versed in the Taoist canon, he would probably be the same as the majority of the humans on the continent. He would not know that at the end of the snowy plains where the demons lived, there was the existence of a moon. Lu Wan's gaze swept over his shoulder and fell on Zhixio's face. Her smile gradually faded, and she said seriously, you are that wolf cub? Chen Changxing noticed that Zhixio's complexion was somewhat pale. He could not help but be somewhat astonished. He thought, just who is this couple to make him react like this? 23rd Demon Generals, 24th Demon Generals. Zhixio's voice was somewhat hoarse. How did you enter the Garden of Zhou? In the demon race, there was a very famous couple. The two of them were both demon generals. Their strength was extremely tyrannical. It was rumored that they were extremely cruel. It was the couple in front of them. Zhixio had killed many demons in the past few years, but the vast majority of the time, he only roamed the snowy plains. After hiding for many days, he would ambush the lone demon soldiers. Demon generals were not opponents that he could defeat. Even though his strength had suddenly increased and he had broken into ethereal opening, he still did not hope to defeat this couple. He did not understand how such a powerful demon general couple could enter the Garden of Zhou. It must be known that the Garden of Zhou only allowed ethereal opening cultivators to exist. Chen Changsheng did not think that this couple would actually be demon generals. This couple wore plain clothes and straw sandals. One of them carried a pole, while the other carried a pot. No matter how he looked at them, they seemed like a couple that sold food. Where did they have the bearing of a demon general? At this moment, he suddenly noticed that on the pole that the middle-aged man carried, there was a person. It was a young woman. Her outer clothes had already been taken off, and she was wearing a white undergarment. However, it was very tight, revealing nothing that should not be revealed. The woman was very beautiful. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her eyelashes did not blink. She was probably unconscious. Chen Changsheng remembered something. When the woman that he and Zhixio had heavily injured was combing her hair on the rock in the center of the lake, she had been wearing the clothes of a certain Eastern hidden sect. This beautiful woman, who was unconscious on the pole, should have been a female disciple of that Eastern hidden sect. The scenery of the lake and mountains was originally incomparably beautiful, and the couple seemed very gentle, even simple and honest. However, with their appearance, the entire world seemed to become gloomy, especially the unconscious woman curled up on the pole and the naked woman with Zhixio piercing her throat. They added a strange color to this scene. The demons were blessed by the heavens. Their bodies could be said to be perfect, and they rarely fell sick. Their meridians were also perfect, and they could cultivate all kinds of techniques. They were different from humans. When they cultivated, they did not absorb starlight, but an even purer form of energy. At the same level, demons were innately stronger than humans. Moreover, the demon general couple that they were facing should be able to crush them in terms of cultivation. Call for help, Zhixio said in a low voice from behind him. Chen Changsheng understood his meaning. They had jumped down from the waterfall to find the sword pool, and at the same time, because they knew that Liang Xiaoxiao, Qi Jian, and Zhuang Huanyu might be inside. 2 against 2, they would definitely lose. If Liang Xiaoxiao and the other 2 could promptly appear, perhaps they still had a chance of victory. But how should he call for help? Should he loudly shout to the silent lake and mountain forest for help? Just as he was seriously considering this matter, Zheshio's hand reached out from behind his shoulder and gave him an item. This was the Zhou army's most commonly used cloud-piercing arrow. It needed to be used with both hands. Chun Changsheng received the cloud-piercing arrow and used a little force. With a whoosh, a firework dispersed in the azure sky, and an extremely loud sound spread in all directions. The next chapter, try to finish before 8:30. Chapter 262, A Cloud-Piercing Arrow. Then, the lakeshore returned to silence. The demon woman called Lu Wan looked at the naked woman Zheshio had stabbed him between his fingers and sighed. "My lord, although you stubbornly acted your own way and were injured because you underestimated the enemy, we can't just watch you die like this." She looked at Chun Changsheng, and a warm smile reappeared on her face. She sincerely said, "Little friend, how about we switch people?" Following her voice, the middle-aged demon man called Tung Xiaoming slowly turned around and moved the pole that had been at the back to the front. Chun Changsheng and Zheshio could clearly see that on the face of the unconscious human woman, there were still some traces of tears. Zheshio was expressionless. With his habits, he would never do anything meaningless on the battlefield, much less place himself in danger. Regardless of the identity of the demon woman stabbed in his fingers, as long as she had truly used the peacock plume, she had the qualifications to become their protective talisman. As for the unconscious human woman or the female disciple from the Eastern secluded sect, what did that have to do with him? Chun Changsheng would also not do anything meaningless. But the difference between his thoughts and Zheshio's was that he believed that if he could keep the human woman alive, then there would be some meaning to this matter. However, he was even more clear that whether it was in battle or in dealing with demons, he was far less experienced than Zheshio. So he maintained his silence and did not interfere with Zheshio's decision. "If we switch people, you can kill us," Zheshio said to the demon couple. Lu Honor looked at him and said very seriously, "You must die in the Garden of Zhou. I will swear on the name of my ancestors, but at the same time, I can also swear that as long as you agree to the exchange, I will give you an hour to leave first. If I violate this oath, may the heavens punish me and the earth destroy me." Zheshio's expression did not change. The oath of the demons is the same as the oath of the humans. It's all nonsense. Lu Wanner calmly asked, "How can I make you believe it?" Zheshio said, "First, you have to make us believe that the woman we have restrained has the qualifications for you to respect your oath." Lu Wanner glanced at her husband and then said, "She is Lady Nank. I don't believe it." Zheshio did not wait for her to finish and cut her off. If she was Nank, then no matter how well-prepared Chun Changsheng and I were, we would still have died in the lake. Although he said this, and he was sure of it, he was still a little confused because he had checked the hair of the naked woman in his arms and confirmed that she didn't have a demon horn. Such a strong and proud demon woman who dared to underestimate him and Chun Changsheng and didn't have a demon horn, besides the legendary Nank. Who else could it be? Chun Changsheng did not know who Nank was, but he realized that when this name was mentioned, the demon general couple became very respectful and cautious, and behind him, Zheshio's breathing became somewhat erratic. "It seems like those human cultivators in the Garden of Zhou were poisoned to death by you." He looked at the large pot in Lu Wanner's hands and the pole on Tung Xiaoming's shoulders, and suddenly thought of this matter. Lu Wanner did not directly answer his question. She looked at him warmly and earnestly and said, "From the moment you entered the Garden of Zhou, we knew your position the entire time. The ones we want to kill are also you. After killing you, we will leave. If you want fewer people to die, there is no harm in cooperating." Cooperate? How could they cooperate? Cooperate with you to kill me? Or commit suicide? It was clearly a very preposterous matter, but when she said it so earnestly and earnestly, It actually seemed to have an incomprehensible persuasiveness. Chen Changsheng stared blankly and asked, "You infiltrated the Garden of Zhou. How many people do you want to kill?" "Only the two of us." Lu Wan gave off the impression that she would say everything she knew and would not hide anything. She said, "The military advisor said that you are the future of humanity, so you must die. Other than the two of you, there are other targets, but it is inconvenient to tell them." Chen Changsheng said, "Two of the divine state's 7 laws have come. Liang Xiaoxiao and Qi Jian, you must kill them." Lu Wan smiled and said, "That's reasonable." Chen Changsheng continued, "Although there are some seniors at the upper level of ethereal opening that have also entered the Garden of Zhou, they are already old and their chances of breaking through are not high." Lu Wan nodded and said, "Correct, these old and incompetent people. How could the military advisor pay attention to them? In the cultivation world, the upper level of ethereal opening, no matter how one looked at it, should be considered an expert, even if they had cultivated to this level for a longer period of time. How could they be called old and incompetent?" Chun Changsheng was a little speechless and said, "Since the targets are all youngsters, the examinees participating in the grand examination this year must be the focus of your observation." Zhuang Huanyu? Zhong Hui and Su Mo had stayed in the Mausoleum of Books. He only wanted the name Zhuang Huanyu. Who is Zhuang Huanyu? Lu Wan wrinkled her eyebrows and looked at her husband. Tung Xiao Ming answered honestly, "Heavenly Academy's Mao Qiuyu student. Not bad." Lu Wan smiled and shook her head. She looked at Chen Changsheng and said, "A name that even I can't remember. How could the military advisor remember?" Chen Changsheng said, "To be remembered by the legendary Lord Blackrobe. I don't know if I should feel honored or afraid." Lu Wan smiled and said, "The military advisor wanted to kill Princess Luo Luo, but you ruined it. How could he forget you?" Chen Changsheng was silent. "Let's hurry up and replace him." Lu Wan looked at him with a sincere expression and advised, "If you escape in half an hour, you can at least live for another hour. If we were to meet those 2 children from Li Mountain while chasing you, maybe you can live even longer. If she really is Nank." Zheshio glanced at the dying demon beauty in his arms and expressionlessly said, "Then no matter who the girl in your poll is, what right do you have to switch with Nank?" Lu Wan said, "You should have guessed that this girl is a disciple of that hidden sect in the East. In terms of seniority, she is the same generation as the Pope. Is that not enough?" Chen Changxing said nothing. Zheshio indifferently said, "I don't believe in any religion. The Pope has nothing to do with me. In switching people, I only care if it's fair or not." Lu Wan sternly said, "Fair? That's reasonable. You tore her clothes, so this girl naturally can't bring clothes for you." As she finished speaking, she didn't seem to move at all, but with a ripping sound, the undergarments of the unconscious beautiful girl in the pole split apart like butterflies, fluttering in the air. In an instant, the girl was completely naked, revealing her youthful and tender body like a white sheep. She hugged her knees, shrinking in the basket. This scene had an indescribable allure. Chen Changsheng slightly tilted his body, not looking directly at it. Zheshio did not react. He stared at the scene in front of him, as if he had seen nothing. The similarity was that they were both very calm, without the slightest hint of panic. Lu Wan continued to smile, her expression warm, but she was inwardly somewhat surprised. After a moment, she slowly continued, "But without clothes, it's still not fair." Chen Changsheng thought of something, and his expression slightly changed. He prepared to speak up and stop her, but he was not in time. He saw an extremely gorgeous blade glow appear by the lake. A stream of bright red blood sprayed out. The right hand of the beautiful girl in the pole was cut off at the wrist. With a clap, the severed hand fell to the ground. Tung Xiaoming slowly squatted down and picked it up. He said to Lu Wan, "Do you want to cook it or fry tonight?" This was the demon general's second sentence today. He was talking about eating human flesh. When he said this, his expression was still simple and honest, as if he was talking about a very ordinary matter. Lu Wan thought it over, then said, "It's still better to cook it in plain water. It's more fragrant." She was also very calm, very casual, just like before in the forest, talking about how to cook red braised meat and how to cook the meat in her hand. Chun Changxing's face became somewhat pale, and his body became somewhat stiff. Zhixio was still calm. He knew that in the rumors, this simple and honest demon general couple were even more famous for their cruel deeds. Moreover, on the snowy plains, he had also eaten some meat that could not be eaten. Lu Wanner smiled and said, "Look, isn't it fair now?" Chen Changsheng and Zhixio had cut off one of the demon beauty's hands. Now, this demon general couple had cut off one of the human beauty's hands. It seemed very fair. In Chen Changsheng's eyes, this demon woman's originally somewhat cordial and sincere smile suddenly became very frightening. He looked at her, fell silent for a while, then said very seriously, "Can you not eat human flesh?" Lu Wanner was stunned. She had thought a lot about how these two human youngsters would respond to this scene. Perhaps they would act tough and say they were not afraid, or vomit in disgust, or cold-bloodedly ignore it. But she had never thought that Chen Changsheng would use such a serious expression to persuade her not to eat human flesh. She could see that Chen Changsheng was serious, so she also became serious like never before. Some seriousness in the world was worthy of admiration. She looked at Chen Changsheng and asked, "Do you eat meat?" Chen Changsheng said, "Yes." She said, "What is the fault of chickens and ducks?" Zhixio suddenly said, "The weak are prey to the strong." Lu Wan'er smiled. "We are stronger than you humans. Why can't we treat you as food?" Chen Changsheng said, "We all have intelligence. We can speak. We can communicate." Lu Wan'er looked at his eyes and said very seriously, "But you humans have eaten dragons before." Chen Changsheng was silent. He really did not know that humans had eaten dragons before. At this moment, he felt the hilt of the dagger tremble slightly. "I am a human, so I want to persuade you not to eat human flesh." He was silent for a while, then said, "Just like if I was a dragon, I would also want to prevent humans from eating dragon flesh. So in the end, it is still a matter of position." Lu Wanner smiled and said. Chen Changxing shook his head and said, "I will not eat a talking dragon, no matter how good it is. I think the person who ate the dragon perhaps cannot be considered a human, at least in my opinion." Hearing this, Lu Wanner was silent for a while, then sighed. That person is indeed no longer a human. While this seemingly housewife of the 23rd Demon General was reminiscing about the past, Chen Changsheng and Zhixio looked at each other. Then, Chen Changsheng took a step back. The two youngsters stood side by side. Then, Chen Changsheng's right hand held the dagger and moved it behind his waist. An extremely thin black shadow appeared from between his thumb and forefinger. Chapter 3. Try to finish before 10:30. Chapter 263. This was the first time since Chen Changsheng and the Black Dragon had gotten to know each other that the Black Dragon had agreed to help him without first negotiating the benefits. This was because that demon had made her recall some unpleasant memories, especially that large iron pot. Just looking at it made her feel annoyed. Moreover, the demon woman had mentioned that dragon-eating person, which made her feel even more annoyed. The black dragon left Chen Changxing's hand and transformed into a blur that the naked eye could not see. It rushed towards the center of the lake, and then like a falling leaf, it noiselessly sank to the bottom of the lake. It easily followed the path that reversed the world and returned to the cold pool on the other side of the cliff. It broke through the water and rushed towards a certain garden. With her current level of strength, she had no way of influencing this battle. What Chen Changsheng wanted her to do was to warn and find helpers. In Chen Changsheng's view, if she could find those upper-level ethereal opening seniors from the various sects, it would be best. However, she did not think this way. She was very clear on which human cultivator was the strongest in this garden. The world of the Garden of Zhou was very vast, but her luck was not bad. It did not take long before she saw the white-clothed girl walking alone on the cliff. However, when she saw the bow and arrow on the girl's body, she felt a chill and fear for some reason. At this moment, Teng Xiaoming slightly raised his eyebrows and glanced into the distance. As the 24th Demon General, His cultivation was extremely high. Although the black dragon came and went like lightning and without a sound, he could still sense some movements. However, the black dragon's movements were just too fast, so fast that he could not see anything. Since Liang Xiao and Qi Jian are both people you want to kill, I understand, Chen Changsheng said to Lu Wan'er. Previously, when he had shot the piercing cloud arrow, they had not responded at all. He had felt that it was rather strange. Now it seemed that the demon general couple had deliberately allowed him to call for help, so that they could draw Liang Xiao and Qi Jian over and capture them in one fell swoop. Lu Wan'er looked at him and smiled. If we can resolve all the problems in the shortest amount of time, then that's naturally for the best. Chen Changsheng looked at the dying demon beauty whose throat had been pierced by Zhixio. He still had some doubts that could not be resolved. I really don't understand where you get the confidence to fight 2 against 4, Zhixio expressionlessly said. If we were outside the Garden of Zhou, with the illustrious reputation of the 23rd and 24th demon generals, I would definitely have already fled. However, since you used some sort of method to forcefully suppress your strength to enter the Garden of Zhou, then you can only use this kind of cultivation to fight. The strongest of you is only at the upper level of ethereal opening. Lu Wan'er looked at him and calmly said, self-confidence is the foundation of an expert. But you know what? Chen Changsheng and I are the same. We are both people of few words. Zhixio looked at her and suddenly said. Lu Wan'er raised her eyebrows and asked with interest, I can't tell. Zhixio said, he said so many things to you, including me talking to you right now, for the same purpose as you to buy time. Lu Wan'er's eyebrows rose even higher as she asked, why? You're right. Confidence is the foundation of an expert. Zhixio said. Chen Changsheng is very confident. He is stronger than the Chen Changsheng you all imagine him to be. Coincidentally, I also think of myself this way. Right at this moment, a chilly and proud voice resounded in the forest. Correct, I also think the same way. As the voice faded, 2 youths dressed in plain Blade Master robes walked out from the forest. The disciples of Mount Li had finally appeared. They had already made their preparations for battle and had come with sword intent. They looked at the demon general couple. Refreshing sword chi dazzled the eyes. In the distant forest, the faint silhouette of clothes could be seen. It should be Zhuang Huanyu who was about to arrive. At this moment, the situation had undergone a huge change. 5 geniuses amongst the human youths against 2 demon experts. No matter how one looked at it, they could fight, and their chances of victory were rather high. Just as Zhixio had said before, no matter how tyrannical the strength of the demon general couple was outside the Garden of Zhou, in the Garden of Zhou, the strongest they could display was the strength of the upper level of ethereal opening. The question that Chen Changsheng could not completely resolve was, why were they so confident? Lu Wan'er's expression was still gentle, completely unlike Liang Xiao and Qi Jian, who looked as if they were facing a great enemy. She looked at Chen Changsheng and said, even if you want to fight, it seems like you should switch people first. She held the life and death of the female disciple from the hidden sects of the East in her hands. The life and death of that demon beauty rested on Zhixio's fingertips. You're the principal of the Orthodox Academy, even though you're so young that even I feel like the Pope is making trouble. Lu Wan'er looked at him and smiled. But since you're a member of the Li Palace, you probably won't just watch as your own kind die. The Longevity Sect is an orthodox sect of profound sections. Although Mount Li likes to kill, they can't just watch as their own kind die. Wolfu Zhixio is a wolf cub. He can survive just by eating meat, but you can't. Hearing these words, Zhixio glanced at Chen Changsheng. In the snowy plains, he was a wolf youth who would not give face to anyone. What Li Palace? What Mount Li? None of it had anything to do with him. As long as he lived, he could kill his enemies. However, after the trip to the capital, he had set his position very straight. In the Garden of Zhou, he was Chen Changsheng's bodyguard. Chen Changsheng glanced at Qi Jian, and Qi Jian glanced at Liang Xiao. Change, Chen Changsheng and Liang Xiao said in unison. Qi Jian nodded his head, indicating that it should be so. Zhishio said nothing. Lu Wanner lightly waved her sleeve and did something. In the basket that Tang Xiaoming was carrying, that beautiful woman who had her right arm cut off but still remained unconscious, woke up. Upon suddenly waking up, the first thing she felt was pain. The woman's face instantly became incomparably pale, and 2 streams of tears flowed from her eyes. However, she clenched her teeth, and besides the very first snort, she actually did not make any other sound. Seeing this scene, even Zhishio was somewhat moved, as if he felt pity and respect. Qi Jian used extreme speed to take off his outer garment, and with a shake of his arm, he wrapped it around her. At this moment, the woman realized that her entire body was naked. After a moment of shock, she hatefully glared at Lu Wanner. Lu Wanner faintly smiled, not minding. "Please do not panic." Liang Xiaoxiao used the simplest of words to explain the current situation. "Many thanks to my fellow Taoists for saving me." The woman slightly crouched down and bowed. Her somewhat tight robe wrapped around her naked body. Anyone would feel somewhat embarrassed. Her bare white feet stepping on the gravel-covered ground would make anyone feel somewhat helpless, but there was not a hint of panic on her beautiful face. She was like a young lady from a noble family, and she was still wearing her home clothes. The admiration in Zhishio's eyes grew stronger and stronger. Qi Jin glanced at him and snorted in his heart. That young lady from a noble family from the east walked towards Chun Changxing's group. Lu Wanner and her husband did not obstruct her. The riverbank was difficult to walk on. She had just lost a hand and lost a lot of blood, so she was currently in a weak state. However, she walked very steadily, probably because she did not want to bring any more variables. After a moment, she walked in front of Chun Changxing's group. Qi Jian took 2 steps forward and extended his hand, intending to support her. A hint of embarrassment and resistance appeared on the woman's beautiful face. Only then did Qi Jian come to his senses. He somewhat hesitantly withdrew his hand and leaned to the side. Chun Changxing nodded to Zhishio. Zhishio withdrew his sharp claws and grabbed the shoulder of the demon beauty, preparing to throw her back to Lu Wanner and her husband. Change. A change that would absolutely occur. A change that everyone had been silently waiting for a very long time. Finally, it happened at this moment. The first change was with Zhishio. When he threw the demon beauty into the air, she, who seemed on her last breaths and could die at any moment, suddenly opened her eyes. Her 2 naked legs were like 2 swords suffused with cold light as they chopped at Zhishio's throat. The hole in her throat was still bleeding, and the stump of her wrist was still dripping blood. From the moment she had been captured, she had not said a single word. Everyone believed that she no longer had the strength to fight. No one could have imagined that she had only been waiting for the moment when Zhishio's fingers left her throat. The next change occurred in front of Qi Jian. The moment he hesitantly turned around, the embarrassment on the face of the female disciple from the east suddenly vanished, leaving behind only indifference. A cold sword edge tore through the robe, carrying with it a terrifying qi as it stabbed at Qi Jian's throat. This robe had originally been Qi Jian's. She had used Qi Jian's kindness and propriety. Since the change had begun, it naturally would not stop here. Qi Jian did not turn around. It seemed like he was completely unprepared. Just when he was about to die to the woman's sneak attack, a bright sword glow lit up. The Mount Lee sword style. It was upright, but it was definitely not peaceful. It was brimming with a somber intent. Although Qi Jian was thin and small, his sword possessed an absolute aura. How could that strange sneak attack contend against the sword that he had been accumulating energy for so long, that he had no qualms about it? With a crisp sound, the Mount Lee sword style in Qi Jian's hand sent the sword in the woman's hand flying. With a swish, it left a bloody mark on the left side of her neck. If not for the fact that the woman's movement technique was too strange, if not for the fact that Qi Jian's battle experience was not too plentiful, he would probably have cut off the woman's head with this strike. If even Qi Jian was prepared for a sneak attack, there was no need to mention Zhishio. By the time the demon beauty's legs had twisted like two swords, Zhixio's two hands were already waiting in midair. Like the edge of a knife stabbing into a rotten wooden board, there was a muffled squelch. Zhixio's 10 fingers had all pierced deeply into the demon beauty's ankles. Blood instantly spurted out. The demon beauty let out a wretched howl of anger. Zhixio's expression was indifferent. His fingers pulled out and his body suddenly blurred. His two hands pierced through the air, preparing to tear the woman to pieces. Just at this moment, Teng Xiaoming indifferently took off his shoulder pole and began to brandish the 2 ropes tied to the basket. Those 2 ropes seemed to come to life and separately tied around the 2 women. With a whooshing sound, the 2 women narrowly escaped from Qi Jian and Zhixio's attack range. The woman pretending to be a disciple of a hidden Eastern sect still had a stern and dignified expression, like a daughter of a noble family. However, half of her chest was soaked in blood, making her seem rather miserable. The demon beauty was even more miserable. From the time she had been combing her hair on the stone in the center of the lake until now, she had continuously received heavy injuries. She could no longer support herself and directly sat down on the ground. With a clang, Chen Chongqing's dagger returned to its sheath. Liang Xiaoxiao's dagger was also unsheathed and grasped in his hand. The previous sneak attack and counterattack had happened too quickly. Although they were prepared, they still did not have the time to unsheathe their swords. It had to be said that Teng Xiaoming was indeed worthy of being the 24th Demon General. His insight, knowledge, experience, and strength were all a level higher than the humans present. The lakeside once again became quiet. The demon woman, sitting on the ground, constantly gasped for breath. She simply did not care that she was completely naked. She hatefully stared at Chen Chongsheng and the others and said, "I refuse to accept this." The woman wearing Qi Jian's robes slightly raised her eyebrows. Her face also revealed a displeased expression. She asked, "It's fine if it's her idiot, but how did you see through me?" The demon beauty angrily said, "What do you mean I'm an idiot?" The woman shook her head, seemingly unwilling to pay attention to her. She looked at Qi Jian and asked, "How did you know that I would attack you?" Qi Jian glanced at Zhixio and said, "I don't know. He told me." The woman looked at Zhixio and slightly raised her eyebrows. She said, "Then how did you know that I was Nank?" Hearing Nank's name, Zhixio's expression became much more serious. He looked at her in silence for a while, then confirmed once more. He shook his head and said, "You're not Nank. I said before, if you were Nank, there would be no need to do so many things. You could just walk out and kill us. There would be no need to be so long-winded and troublesome." The woman slightly creased her eyebrows and said, "Then how did you see through me? I don't have a demon horn, and my blood is red." The demon beauty's recovery ability was extremely terrifying. After suffering such heavy injuries, she only sat for a while before standing up again. She said with a face full of anger, "That's right. It's fine that my blood is green. A few days ago, I got a new hairstyle and cut it a bit too much. I can't completely cover up my demon horn. It's fine that you guys saw through me, but what about this girl? Her blood is clearly red, and she doesn't even have a horn. How could you see that she's one of us?" Chen Chongsheng and the others also looked at Zhixio, not knowing just how he had seen through her. Zhixio was silent for a very long time, then said, "You guys did it too deliberately, as if you wanted us to see that her blood was red." He was talking about how the demon general couple had cut off the woman's hand without a second word. Lu Wanner glanced at the woman and smiled. "See, I said that your method was superfluous." The woman looked at Zhixio, very confused. She asked, "Just this one reason? Is there no other evidence?" "Between life and death, one reason is enough," Zhixio expressionlessly said. The woman was even more displeased by this. She thought, why is it that the plan I've painstakingly thought up is completely useless in front of these humans? The demon beauty looked at her and laughed. "See, I said that your head isn't very bright, but you just have to call me an idiot every day." The woman expressionlessly said, "If you weren't an idiot, you wouldn't have thought of sneaking away by yourself and vainly try to kill these 2 people by yourself." Chen Chongsheng and the others had a very strange feeling. The demon beauty was extremely seductive and had a mature charm. The woman, on the other hand, had a dignified expression and a beautiful appearance, as if she was the daughter of a noble family that had been strictly raised since childhood. However, when the two of them mocked and argued with each other, they felt that the two women were incomparably similar, as if they were the same person. Qi Jian felt even more strange. This was the first time he had truly seen demons and fought with demons. He discovered that these demons also knew how to argue and quarrel, just like his senior brothers and sisters in the sect. However, in the next moment, he came to his senses and realized that his way of thinking was too dangerous. What brought him back to his senses was the change in the bodies of the two demon women. Their hands that had clearly been cut off were actually recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was not the terrifying scene of regenerating muscle and bone, but rather a translucent light blue hand had appeared on their wrists. However, that seemingly spiritual hand was gradually becoming a real hand. Chen Chongsheng was very shocked. Although the demons had powerful regenerative abilities, unless they were extremely pure-blooded members of the imperial clan, no one could regrow severed limbs. Moreover, this was clearly not some supreme demon art that allowed severed limbs to regrow. Zhishio finally thought of something, and his face instantly paled. These two demon women truly were not Nang. They were Nang's two wings. Have you two played enough? Lu Wana looked at the two women and said somewhat helplessly, if it weren't for the fact that the two of you fought to be first in everything, I'm afraid that today's matter would have been settled long ago. Once Lord Zhishio kills that phoenix and learns of this matter, he'll punish you for another 3 years. Let's see what you can do then. Hearing this, the two witches revealed fearful expressions and didn't say anything else. Lu Wana looked at Chen Chongsheng and smiled apologetically, then said, do it. Her black hair danced in the wind, and her clothes madly fluttered. This time, it was not a sneak attack, but a battle based on strength. On the contrary, it gave Chen Chongsheng and the others an enormous pressure. Qi Jian was awe-inspiring and fearless. He gripped his sword and advanced. Zhishio's face was expressionless. With a metallic edge, he extended his fingertip and once again attacked the demon woman. The chi on the lakeside was thrown into chaos. Sword chi and demon chi clashed. Chen Chongsheng looked at Lu Wana, his expression grave. Liang Xiaoxiao stared at Teng Xiaoming, his face slightly pale. In terms of cultivation, they were higher than Zhishio and Qi Jian, so it was only natural that these two demon generals were theirs. In this battle, the young humans could still fight. If they could fight, they might not necessarily lose. Perhaps they could hold out until the Black Dragon brought the other human experts over. This was Chen Chongsheng's plan, but he made a mistake on one matter. Lu Wana had said to him to make a move, but in reality, she had not said it to him, but to someone else. Amidst the flying sand and pebbles, a sword arrived behind Zhishio. This sword was very strong. This sword was very treacherous. No matter how cautious Zhishio was, he could not have imagined that a sword would stab at him from behind. With a squelch, the sword stabbed into his waist. Just like that, blood spurted out. Almost at the same time, the demon woman flew in front of him. Her hands, suffused with a wretched green, stabbed into his shoulders. Her black hair scattered like steel needles, piercing straight into his eyes. At the juncture of life and death, Zhishio let out an extremely ruthless howl. The Eyes of the Wolf Tribe, Youth Turned Blood Red. The secondary edition has made a post in the book review section, asking for questions. If anyone has any interest, curiosity, or confusion regarding me and the book, Choosing Heaven's Chronicles, you can ask in this post. In a few days, I will gather together to answer everyone's questions. Yes, there is no other reason. I just want to communicate with everyone. Moi, moi, moi. There won't be too many updates tomorrow. In addition, the title of today's chapter really took up a lot of my brain cells. Chapter 264. There are some problems with Genesis's technology. The post I mentioned yesterday has only appeared today. I apologize to everyone for this. If anyone has any questions, please follow the post. Feel free to leave your comments. Don't stand on ceremony. I haven't written much today, but there will be more tomorrow. His eyes turned red and the hair on his cheeks sprouted. It was the transformation of the demi-human. In just a moment, Zheshio's strength had increased by several times. His body's toughness had also reached an unimaginable level. The demoness hands had torn his shoulder into a bloody mess, but she had no way of crushing his bones. Most importantly, that treacherous sword that had stabbed into his waist had no way of advancing any further. The sword was pulled out with a whoosh and slashed at the back of Zheshio's neck. With the chi attached to the sword, even if Zheshio had completely transformed, he would not be able to resist. Qi Jian saw this scene out of the corner of his eye and was incomparably shocked. However, his sword was currently entangled with that woman, so it was simply impossible for him to save her. His left hand gripped the sheath of his sword and swung it horizontally behind Zheshio. He used the extremely sharp mount, Li's sword style, to block that sword. However, the sword began to move like a spirit snake, as if it was extremely familiar with Qi Jian's sword style. It swept through the air and easily broke through Qi Jian's sword energy. The sword's second stab had never been aimed at Zheshio. Its target had always been Qi Jian. Another soft squelch resounded from the lakeshore. Qi Jian's abdomen had been pierced by that treacherous and extremely powerful sword, causing blood to spurt out. In a flash, the sword left Qi Jian's abdomen like a bolt of lightning and once again slanted forward, stabbing at Chun Changsheng. That person's first stab had heavily injured Zheshio, and the second had heavily injured Qi Jian. Noiselessly and unprepared, they had brought about extremely painful consequences. Could Chun Changsheng avoid them? Zheshio and Qi Jian had been stabbed one after the other. Chun Changsheng finally reacted. His feet began to move with the Yesher step, and he narrowly avoided the edge of the sword stabbing at him from the back. However, at this moment, the attacks of the demon general couple arrived. Tung Xiaoming expressionlessly picked up 2 poles and threw them at Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng had been forced forward by that treacherous sword and had no energy left to dodge. The 2 loads were like 2 small mountains, smashing towards his head. Chun Changsheng's true essence surged forth, and his short sword left its sheath, executing an extremely ingenious blossoming 2 branches. In a seemingly impossible situation, he accurately stabbed at the 2 carrying poles. With a series of tearing sounds, the 2 poles shattered and turned into 2 clouds of dust. The carrying pole in Tung Xiaoming's hands smashed down toward his head. If the previous 2 carrying poles were like 2 small mountains, then the carrying pole of the 24th Demon General was like a real mountain. With an incomparably heavy shadow, it directly shrouded Chun Changsheng's body. A loud bang resounded. A huge pit had appeared on the shore of the lake. Dust and smoke flew everywhere. Not far away from them, the trees fell down with cracking sounds. In just a moment, several acres of trees had been overturned. The demon beauty gave a shrill shriek. Taking advantage of Zheshio's heavy waist, she displayed her demonic arts. Her fingers glowed with a strange green light as she attacked Zheshio. The woman with a dignified appearance did not have the slightest bit of gentleness. Her sleeves lightly swayed in the wind. Faintly, it seemed as if countless feathers had appeared. Countless bolts of qi attacked Qi Jian's face. Zheshio's eyes were blood red, looking abnormally sinister. His 2 hands flashed through the air, creating several gray shadows, valiantly blocking the demon beauty's powerful attacks. However, Qi Jian's lower abdomen had been pierced through by that sword. His injuries were too heavy, and he had no energy left to fight. He was struck down by the woman, his face pale and his expression weary. At this point, the 3 human youths had already been forced into desperate straits. Lu Wan who had not made a move all this time, finally made her move. She carried the large iron pot in her hands and arrived before the 3 youths with a terrifying sound. With a flick of her wrist, the large iron pot came crashing down towards their heads. The iron pot was truly very large, so large that it could cover the sky above their heads. It was like a dark cloud. If this large iron pot were to fall, Chun Changsheng and the other 2 would definitely have no chance of survival. Just at this moment, in that deep pit on the shore of the lake, in that space filled with dust, a light suddenly burst forth. Soon after, there was the sound of footsteps like the beating of war drums. The wind on the lake suddenly broke, howling mournfully. Chen Changsheng gripped his dagger and leapt out of the deep pit. Blocking in front of Zhixio and Qi Jian, he thrust his dagger forward. He thrust towards that iron pot that covered the sky. With a bang, a hole appeared in the center of the iron pot. Soon after, there was the ear-splitting sound of metal grinding against metal. Chen Changsheng's dagger pierced through the iron pot and continued forward. The iron pot, like a dark cloud, now had an additional layer of light. Chen Changsheng's dagger advanced in that layer of light, bringing with it even more light. It was like a ray of heavenly light descending from the gloomy rain clouds. Swish, 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 swish. Those were the steps of the sword. Swish, 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 swish. Those were Zhixio's claws and teeth. With a light swish, Luan Er's face paled slightly. She hastily retreated, a line of blood appearing on her neck. The demon beauty gave a muffled groan and then collapsed. On her naked chest, several bloody marks had appeared. Qi Jian finally could not hold on any longer. Clutching his abdomen, he knelt on the ground, his fingers covered in blood. But at least he was still alive. Chen Changsheng and Zhixio were also still alive. The battle was suddenly divided. The lakeside grew quiet once more. Lu Wanner lightly touched the bloody mark on her neck. Her gaze on Chen Changsheng became much more solemn. It was still as warm as before, but it no longer gave off any sense of intimacy. She had never imagined that the dagger in Chen Changsheng's hand would be so sharp that it could so easily pierce through a magical artifact. Just what sort of material was this dagger made of? Chen Changsheng turned his head to look at Zhixio. He had suffered severe injuries, so he could only hope that Zhixio still had the strength to fight. Zhixio's upper body was covered in blood, but he could still stand. The gray hair on his cheeks had not been completely retracted, and he was constantly gasping for breath. He seemed to be particularly exhausted, and his eyes were abnormally cold. Seeing Zhixio's eyes, Chen Changsheng's heart also grew cold. Lu Wanner and Tung Xiaoming looked at each other, seeing the strange look in each other's eyes. These three human youths were actually able to endure this round of true attacks. This had truly surpassed their imaginations. It must be known that before entering the Garden of Zhou, even they did not know of the existence of that dagger. If you had listened to what I said before we left, that wolf cub would have died long ago. The demon beauty was once again heavily injured by Zhixio's fingertips. She angrily said to the girl beside her. The girl looked at Chen Changsheng and Tung Xiaoming in silence for a while, then calmly said, "With just the two of us, we really might not be able to defeat these two youths." Chen Changsheng did not pay attention to what they were saying. Zhixio also no longer cared about who Nank was. Qi Jian was the same, because they were more concerned about that dagger, that treacherous dagger. They looked at Liang Xiaoxiao with different expressions. Qi Jian's face was pale, and his expression was shocked. He was very sad, so much so that he was somewhat absent-minded. He looked at Liang Xiaoxiao and muttered, "Why?" Liang Xiaoxiao's face was even paler than Qi Jian's, but his face was expressionless, and he did not say anything, even if the dagger in his hand was dripping with his companion's blood. Chapter 265. No one could have imagined that the sinister and ruthless sword had come from their side, and that the person who had launched the sneak attack was Liang Xiaoxiao. Zhixio had incomparably rich battle experience, and he had always had a cold temperament and rarely trusted people. Because of the environment in which Chen Changsheng had grown up and encountered, he had always handled matters with extreme caution. Thus, no matter how charming and pitiful the two demon girls were, they could not deceive them. However, even the two of them had not imagined that Liang Xiaoxiao would suddenly attack. From the Mausoleum of Books to the Garden of Zhou, Chen Changsheng had always noticed that Liang Xiaoxiao had a faint hostility towards him. However, of the Divine State's 7 laws, Go Hanshi was a sincere and steady gentleman, and Guan Feibai was a violent swordsman. Perhaps they were opponents or enemies, but he had never thought that these disciples of the Mount Li sword sect would be sinister villains, much less that Liang Xiaoxiao would collude with the demons. The war between the humans and the demons had already lasted for nearly 1,000 years. Whether it was the Great Zhou in the north or the longevity sect in the south, how many seniors and fellow disciples had died wave after wave? As cultivators, they should have been even more clear that this was a war to exterminate the human race. So why was Liang Xiaoxiao willing to be ordered around by the demons? The most shocked person was naturally Qi Jian. His abdomen had been pierced through by Liang Xiaoxiao's sword, and he had suffered an extremely heavy injury. But what was even more wounded was his heart. He looked at Liang Xiaoxiao, his face pale and his expression perplexed. Even now, he still could not understand why his third brother, who had grown up with him and had always taken care of him, would strike such a vicious blow. Liang Xiaoxiao said nothing. His face was also pale, and there was a faint struggle in the depths of his eyes. But even deeper was a joy that bordered on madness. It was pain, but also joy. Chen Changsheng and the other two had thought of many things and many possibilities, but in reality, they had only used a very short amount of time. The demons had always been cold and emotionless. Seeing that their plan had finally succeeded and Liang Xiaoxiao's sneak attack had succeeded, how could they give them a chance to catch their breath and reason? Teng Xiaoming expressionlessly lifted his shoulder pole and once again rushed in front of the three. Clasping his hands together, he mercilessly smashed it down. The wind by the lake suddenly shattered into countless thin strands, and all the nearby trees were all destroyed and toppled. The extremely terrifying carrying pole pressed down like a mountain. Even if Chen Changsheng and the other two weren't injured, it would still be extremely difficult for them to directly block an all-out attack from the infamous 24 demon generals, not to mention that their current condition was extremely bad. Zhixio's shoulders were badly mangled. Amidst the messy wolf fur that had yet to recede, one could faintly make out the eerie white bones. What was even more frightening was that these injuries were caused by the peacock plume hidden in the fingers of the demon race woman. An extremely small trace of green could already be seen in the depths of the wolf race youth's pupils. The legendary peacock plume had a poison that could poison powerful demonic beasts to death. Now, the poison had begun to wreak havoc in his body. Qi Jian was even more miserable. His abdomen was overflowing with blood. Even if he used the last of his strength, he could only barely hold onto the Mount Li relic sword. He could not even stand up, so how could he fight? Chen Changsheng looked slightly better. He, who had rushed out of the pit with his sword in hand, was covered in dust and looked extremely pathetic. There were no wounds on the surface of his body, and there were no bloodstains on his clothes. In reality, he only looked a little better. Previously, he had received Teng Xiaoming's first blow from the shoulder pole at the bottom of the pit. Even though his body had been bathed in dragon blood, he still could not completely withstand it. The bones in his left arm had already begun to crack, and several of his ribs had already been broken. Even more troublesome was that his sea of consciousness had received a massive shock. It was incomparably vexing and uncomfortable. His chest was extremely stuffy, and he could vomit blood at any moment. How could the three heavily injured youths face this mountainous shoulder pole? After Liang Xiaoxiao had succeeded in his sneak attack, he had swiftly retreated. From a distance of several dozen zhang, he watched this scene in silence. That demon beauty smile was like a flower. That dignified young lady's expression was calm. Lu Honor sympathized with them and then waited. She waited for Chen Changsheng and the other two to die, as expected. Chen Changsheng obviously did not want to die. It could be said without question that from the time he was 10 years old, he was the person in this world who did not want to die the most. For the sake of not dying, he had worked very hard, so he had naturally made many preparations. When everyone believed that they were doomed, including Qi Jian, and even Zhixio, who had walked the line between life and death countless times, silently said to himself, "So be it." Chen Changsheng once more began to work hard, taking out the item he had prepared. It was a metal ball, its surface covered in lines that looked like scales. Chen Changsheng poured his true essence into the metal ball. The surface of the metal ball flashed with light, and then it began to rapidly tremble. Those scales began to split open. The fine sounds of springs and metal rubbing against each other rang out in rapid succession. The splitting metal ball instantly transformed, producing several thin, umbrella-like surfaces, then the umbrella ribs, and then the handle. These transformations took place in an extremely short amount of time. The shoulder pole that carried the demon general's vigorous strength had not even fallen. A rather old oil paper umbrella appeared in Chun Changsheng's hands. This umbrella seemed ordinary and unremarkable, just like him. A loud bang resounded. On the shore of the lake, there wasn't another huge pit. Instead, there were dozens of cracks that were several feet deep. Powerful chi flew in all directions, striking the hard cobblestones and leaving clear marks on their surface. Some of the chi from the terrifying collision swept into the depths of the forest, leaving mottled marks on the bark of the trees. Who knew how many birds that had not been able to escape in time were tragically struck to the ground? The dust gradually settled, and the echoes from the cliff behind the lake also gradually faded away. Chun Changsheng did not die, because the carrying pole was blocked by the ordinary-looking umbrella in his hand. A faint yellow light fell from the edge of the umbrella, like a curtain, enveloping Chun Changsheng within. He stood in front of Zhuxiu and Qi Jian. Looking at this scene, the demon beauty covered her mouth, shocked speechless. Liang Xiaoxiao slightly raised his eyebrows, his expression grave. Lu Wen slightly creased her brow, revealing a pondering expression, as if she had thought of something. Only Teng Xiaoming's expression remained wooden. His right foot took another step forward, his two hands raised a shoulder pole, and once again struck down. The wind and clouds above the lake had been carried over by that shoulder pole. There was another loud bang. The yellow paper umbrella had once again blocked it, but Chun Changsheng's face became even paler. In Wenshui City, the Tang Old Master had gifted him this legendary magical artifact. Zhuxiu had once said that this umbrella could block a full-powered attack from a star condensation expert. Zhuxiu had also said that since the demons had used some sort of method to forcefully suppress their cultivation and send 2 star condensation demon generals into the Garden of Zhou, then Teng Xiaoming and Lu Wen would at most be at the peak of ethereal opening. Logically, the umbrella in his hand could obviously block the opponent's attack. The problem was, how many full-powered attacks from the demon general could it block? Using a magical artifact also required the assistance of true essence. The amount of true essence he had was much less than cultivators of the same level. So how long could he last? The most crucial problem was that the area of the yellow paper umbrella was not very large. How could he protect Zhuxiu and Qi Jian when all these demon experts attacked together? There was no way. He had no way of protecting his companions. If he continued to hold on, it would still be difficult to resolve his predicament. Then, he could only send his companions away. Just as the yellow paper umbrella blocked the shoulder pole, his right hand shot out like lightning and stuffed several pills into Zhuxiu's mouth. At the same time, he stuffed a small object into Zhuxiu's hand. These pills were antidotes that the priests of the Li Palace had refined according to his prescription. His medical skills had been inherited from Taoist Ji, and Taoist Ji was the strongest medical expert in the entire continent. From this, one could imagine the effects of these pills. Perhaps they could not cure the poison of the peacock plume, but they could at least help Zhuxiu suppress it for a while. As for the slightly cold object, it was a button. When he left the capital, he had only brought a single button. He had originally thought that if he encountered any danger in the Garden of Zhou, it could help him protect his life. But now, it seemed that he would have to give it to someone else. Back in the Orthodox Academy, when Luoluo had given him the button, she had said very clearly that the button could only carry 2 people away at most. Chun Changsheng raised the umbrella and looked at the demon experts rapidly approaching. Without turning around, he calmly said to Zhuxiu behind him, "Take him away." The demon's plan in the Garden of Zhou was definitely not limited to this, but the successive events that had occurred by the lake were enough to help them confirm that of the 3 of them, the demon's first target was Qi Jian. Otherwise, the demons could have gathered all their strength and killed him and Zhuxiu first. It would not have been like this, waiting for Qi Jian to enter a situation of certain death before Lu Wanner said those 3 words, and Liang Xiaoxiao finally struck. Zhishou understood this point, but he did not understand. Even if Qi Jian was the last disciple of the Mountly sect master, why would the demons value him so much? He also understood that Chen Chongsheng had given him the button, which was tantamount to giving him the hope to live. And if Chen Chongsheng stayed, he would have to face death. He also understood that Chen Chongsheng would not take Qi Jian away himself, nor would he leave Qi Jian behind. Thus, in this arrangement, there was only one possibility left. At the same time, he also understood that he had been poisoned and was powerless to fight. If he stayed, he would not be able to help Chen Chongsheng, so it was better to take Qi Jian and leave. What he understood the most was that since Chen Chongsheng had already made up his mind, no matter what he did, it would be meaningless. It would only be a waste of time. Without hesitation, Zhishou picked up Qi Jian and activated the button in his palm. In his embrace, Qi Jian's small face was abnormally pale. His eyebrows were furrowed, his eyes closed, and his eyelashes fluttering. He looked extremely pitiful, but he had no idea what had happened. A strand of green smoke rose from under the yellow umbrella. In the final moment, Zhishou looked at Chen Chongsheng's back and expressionlessly thought, just who is whose bodyguard? If I can survive today, it seems like I really will owe a certain personal life. At almost the same time, the demon general's 3rd blow from his carrying pole fell. The ground fiercely quaked. Dust filled the air, obscuring the green smoke. Countless cracks appeared and fresh earth tumbled out, just like a plowing field in the spring. The dust settled. Chen Chongsheng stood alone at his original position. His left hand held the umbrella. His right hand gripped the dagger. His expression was extremely serious as he prepared for the final battle. This chapter's name is cooler than the sorrowful sword, so I'll use it instead. I'll try to finish the next chapter by 11. Chapter 266. That's the thousandly button? Lu Wana looked at the umbrella in Chen Chongsheng's left hand and asked in astonishment, could this be the umbrella that not even Su Li could afford? The war between the humans and demons was exceptionally cruel. On the boundary line of the snowy plains, assassinations and the like had never ceased. In order to win the final victory in this war of extermination, both sides would stop at nothing. As long as there was a chance, they would not hesitate to pay any price to kill the young geniuses in the opposing camp that had the opportunity to mature. The reason why Zhishou, at such a young age and still in the meditation realm, had such a great reputation on the continent was because, alone, he was able to survive in the cruelest and most dangerous place. In order to protect their own young geniuses and give them enough time to mature, the sects and schools of the human world would send out experts to secretly protect their most valued junior disciples before they truly matured, or perhaps bestow them with a few life-saving magical artifacts. For example, when Tianhai Xingxue was fighting in Snowhold Pass, Divine General Fei Dian would often hide at his side. Young geniuses like the Divine State's 7 laws, Zhuang Huanyu, Su Moyu, and Zheng Hui all received such treatment. The demons had chosen the Garden of Zhou to carry out their assassinations precisely because the Garden of Zhou was very special. Senior human experts could not enter, so young human cultivators could only protect themselves. Of course, those young human cultivators would definitely have magical artifacts that could save their lives. Even more so for someone like Chen Chongsheng, who was doted upon by the Pope. It was just that Chen Chongsheng really had too many magical artifacts, and they were all so rare and powerful. Whether it was the legendary yellow paper umbrella or the thousandly button that cultivators treasured as much as their lives, they were both magical artifacts of the highest level on the continent. As for the seemingly ordinary dagger in his hand, it possessed an unimaginable sharpness that even made Lu Wanner feel some fear. According to their original plan, the demon experts that had infiltrated the Garden of Zhou would use the rumor of the sword pool as a bait to gather by the lake. With the addition of the spy hidden among the humans, they should have been able to very easily kill Chen Chongsheng, Zhishou, and Qi Jian. With this, They would have completed 3/4 of the mission, and then they would have gone to meet up with their lord and killed Su Yurong. Who could have imagined that such a meticulous plan would ultimately be destroyed by Chun Changsheng alone? Zhixio had been poisoned by the peacock plume, and Qi Jian's lower abdomen had been pierced through. Presumably, his internal organs and meridians had also suffered severe injuries. But in the end, he had left the lake and had not died yet. Lu Wanner looked at Liang Xiaoxiao, her gaze landing on the cloud-patterned ribbon on his left wrist, and nodded. She did not recognize this disciple of the Mount Li sword sect. She only knew that he was the famous third law of the Divine Kingdom in the south. He was the human that the military counselor had said would help them before they entered the garden. Liang Xiaoxiao's face was still pale, and his voice trembled slightly, but his tone was very firm. We must confirm Qi Jian's death. Everyone who came here must die. Qin Changsheng had used a precious thousandly button to send Zhixio and Qi Jian away. If they were in the real world, no matter how strong these demon experts were, they would not be able to catch up to them. Regrettably, this was the Garden of Zhou. There were natural barriers between space, so Zhixio and Qi Jian could not have truly gone 1,000 li away. They were definitely still within the garden. Most importantly, Lu Wanner could grasp their whereabouts at any time. There's no need to kill you. I'm very satisfied because I really like you. She looked at Chun Changsheng and said with a gentle expression, It's very rare for me to like a human, because just now you very seriously advised me not to eat human flesh. Other humans, including many of my clansmen, would only feel loathing or fear after hearing the rumors about his husband and wife. No one would advise me as seriously as you did. You're a very different child. It's a pity that you can't live, because this is the military counselor's request. After saying this, she picked up the large pot with a hole in it. Her figure suddenly faded, and she floated towards the surface of the lake. Tung Xiaoming tied the 2 baskets back to his shoulder pole and followed her. The only people left on the lakeside were the demon beauty, the dignified woman, and Liang Xiaoxiao. Chun Changsheng looked at Liang Xiaoxiao and asked a question, why? This was something he really wanted to know, and it was also something Qi Jian wanted to know the most. In the past several hundred years, there were very few cases of humans working for the demon race, not to mention that Liang Xiaoxiao was one of the divine state's 7 laws. His future was incomparably bright, and the demon race couldn't possibly give him more benefits or a better future. No matter how he thought about it, his betrayal didn't make any sense. Liang Xiaoxiao didn't answer. He slowly raised the sword in his hand, and his eyes were filled with frost. Leaving the 3 of us behind, don't you think this is underestimating you? You have to know that I'm very curious as to what other treasures you have on you. The demon beauty looked at him and said with a charming voice, that husband and wife chasing after Qi Jian and Zhixio really did seem to be a form of contempt, but Chun Changsheng didn't think this way. The one behind this plot was that mysterious and terrifying Lord Blackrobe. Countless years of deeds had long since proven that the demon military counselor had always been meticulous. The demon race left 3 people behind to kill him, which meant that the 3 of them could definitely kill him. The youngest principal of the Tradition Academy in human history is going to quietly die like this. Even I feel a little disappointed. The demon beauty looked at him and sighed. The dignified and beautiful woman's aura was the complete opposite of hers, but when they stood together, they were very similar, just like a pair of twins. Faintly, Chun Changsheng could even see a pair of wings condensed from clear light behind the 2 of them, just like the scene before when they regrown their severed hands. A powerful and cold aura was emitted from the wings of light behind the 2 women. Chun Changsheng's divine sense was very sensitive, and he was very sure that this kind of power wasn't something he could fight against. Moreover, Liang Xiaoxiao's despicable and sinister, but indeed powerful sword was still on the side. Several of his ribs were already broken, and there were who knew how many cracks on the surface of the bones in his arms. Previously, he almost spat out blood several times, but he forcefully swallowed it back. His sea of consciousness was severely shaken, and his meridians, which were originally not smooth, were now even more sluggish than before. Although it looked like he wasn't injured on the surface, his injuries were already very serious. It was obvious that his enemies were well aware of this. This was a battle without any suspense, even if he had a very powerful magic tool and a very sharp short sword. If the battle continued for a while longer, he wouldn't even be able to lift up the umbrella, and he wouldn't even be able to hold the hilt of the sword. What could he do? But Chen Changsheng didn't feel this way. He held the umbrella in one hand and the sword in the other. His expression was still serious and focused. Despair? No. As long as he persevered, there would definitely be hope. In the faraway forest, that figure seemed to be a little hesitant. If he could display his willpower and ability in this battle, perhaps he could help that person gain more courage. Also, he had been waiting for the good news of the Black Dragon's return. The white ceremonial robe lightly swayed in the mountain wind. The young girl silently walked forward on the mountain ridge. She was a little lonely, so she was tired, but her expression was still calm. Seeing the long bow on the young girl's back, the Black Dragon was alarmed. She clearly came to find her, but suddenly, the Black Dragon didn't want to get close to her. The Black Dragon's gaze followed the white-clothed young girl's footsteps into the distance. She saw the mountain peak that extended into the depths of the plains. At this moment, the sun once again set in the west. The mysterious plains once again began to burn, and the mountain peak also became blood red. The strange feeling she had when she saw the mountain peak the day before once again appeared in the Black Dragon's divine sense. She wanted to go there and take a look. There seemed to be something there, calling out to her from afar. But she didn't dare to go there, because at this very moment, at the peak of Sunset Valley, amidst the endless multicolored light, sat a young girl of about 10 years of age and an old man playing the zither. The Black Dragon's vision was very good. She could even clearly see the childishness in the young girl's eyes. She was very clear that the fear and unease that had previously arisen in her heart half came from the longbow of the white-clothed young girl, and the other half came from the young girl's eyes. As the world's noblest and proudest Black Frost Dragon, she felt extremely ashamed because of this fear and unease. If it was her true body, no matter if it was the white-clothed young girl, or the zither-playing old man, she could easily swallow them in one gulp. She didn't even need to drink water. But now, she was only a strand of dragon soul attached to the jade Rui. She did not have the ability to participate in the battle between Chen Changsheng and those demon experts. As for now, in the battle that was about to begin, she couldn't even get close. The young girl dressed in white continued to silently traverse the mountains. The young girl with indifferent eyes and brows continued to wait on the other side of the mountain. No matter how long it took, they would eventually meet. Among the wild grass on the mountain, a crack suddenly appeared and spread down the mountain, as if a large rock was rolling down. What was rolling down the mountain was not a boulder, but Zheshio and Qi Jian. The blades of grass were sharp and the rocks were hard, but they did not leave a single wound on Zheshio's face. Qi Jian dejectedly and powerlessly leaned against his shoulder, his black hair in disarray and his small face pale. Zheshio carried Qi Jian on his back and madly ran towards the setting sun, blood constantly dripping from his body. At this moment, they had already passed through the lake that reversed the heavens and earth and arrived at the world on the other side of the cliff. He did not know that the demon general couple was chasing after him, nor did he know that they could grasp his whereabouts at any time. However, his instinctive sense of danger made him abnormally vigilant. He seemed to be able to hear the footsteps coming from behind him, and could even hear the strange sound of the broken pot. He had to go even faster, but in the next moment he suddenly stopped. Qi Jian struggled to open his eyes. Looking at the perfectly straight path in front of him, he weakly asked, "What's wrong?" Zheshio expressionlessly looked at the path in front of him and asked, "How do we go next?" Qi Jian weakly replied, "How should I know?" Because of a few things that had happened in the dueling phase of the grand examination, he had always loathed this wolf youth and did not want to have anything to do with him. Now, he was being carried on his back, which already made him feel very wronged and sad. Who could have expected that this fellow would actually ask a heavily injured person like him how to go? It was truly useless. I can't see, so from now on, you'll be leading the way. Zhixio's voice was very calm, devoid of any emotion. The sunset reflected off his eyes. They were not red, but a deep green. The poison of the peacock plume had finally taken effect. The sunset also reflected off the mountain path, making it even more serene and even longer. Brave boys and girls, see you tomorrow. Chapter 267. Because he had lost too much blood, Qi Jian was somewhat muddle-headed. Upon hearing Zhixio's words, it took him a while to react. He instantly became much more clear-headed, his face even paler. With great difficulty, he turned his head to look at Zhixio's profile. Seeing that his face was still expressionless and those two eyes that had clearly lost their spirit, his body instantly went stiff. You can't see, Qi Jian said in a trembling voice as he tried to get down from Zhixio's body. Zhixio had no intention of letting him get down. His two hands grabbed onto Qi Jian's legs like iron bars, making it impossible for him to leave. Feeling the warmth and strength from his legs, Qi Jian was both embarrassed and anxious. He used all his strength to try and leave. No matter how he struggled, Zhixio did not react. He just stood there like a statue. Qi Jian's strength grew weaker and weaker, and his struggles also grew smaller and smaller. Finally, he gave up and powerlessly leaned back against Zhixio's shoulder. Now that he looked at Zhixio again, that normally expressionless face that Qi Jian loathed so much that he only wanted to get away from, suddenly had an indescribable flavor to it. Yes, he really was like a statue, like a wolf standing on a cliff, gazing into the distance, or perhaps a youth. Unknowingly, Qi Jian's heart had softened, and the depths of his eyes had also softened. As he looked at Zhixio's face, his pale face revealed an expression of admiration. Yet for some reason, he also felt particularly sad, especially when he looked at Zhixio's eyes. Thus, he began to cry in great sorrow. Zhixio's expression was still indifferent, as if he was not affected by his blindness. If crying could solve problems, then I would definitely be the best at crying in the world. On the snowy plains, in the battle with the demons, there were countless problems that needed to be resolved, problems related to life and death. Qi Jian felt very humiliated. He raised his arm and used his sleeve to wipe away the tears on his face, but he could not wipe them clean because the tears continued to flow. Zhixio's voice became somewhat hesitant. Perhaps you, after a moment of silence, he added, "Don't cry, it's fine." It was obvious that he was not skilled at comforting people, and even less skilled at coaxing them, so his tone was rather stiff, but it also made it seem even more sincere. Qi Jian sniffled and gave a somewhat aggrieved grunt. It was unknown who this grievance was directed at, but he whispered, "Then, let's go." Zhixio looked at the darkness before him, composed himself, and said, "Let's still head in the direction of the mountainside Whispering Wood." Qi Jian held his shoulder and raised his head with some difficulty. He gazed at the perfectly straight mountain path in front of the two of them and said, "Go straight ahead, turn right after 4,000 feet. I will tell you." Without the slightest hesitation, Zhixio tightly held onto the crook of his leg and walked forward, unexpectedly not having the slightest doubt in his words. This made Qi Jian somewhat moved, but also somewhat puzzled. The mountain breeze caressed Zhixio's face, but he had already closed his eyes. Only then did the mountain breeze land on Qi Jian's little face. The wind seemed to carry some kind of warmth. Qi Jian felt somewhat warm and at ease. In the mountains of the Garden of Zhou, the incessant sounds of footsteps and Qi Jian's childish and weak directions rang out, as well as Zhixio's calm and indifferent replies. "Slow down, there's a barrier ahead. A small stream, 20 feet long, and on the other side is a sandy land. Are you okay? Faster, but no buts. Be careful, don't bump into the tree." According to Zhixio's plan, they had to find the human cultivators in the Garden of Zhou as quickly as possible, but after running for several dozen li, they did not encounter a single person. Last night, the vast majority of the human cultivators had already gathered in those gardens according to Chun Chongsheng's, or the white-clothed girl's arrangements. Now that he thought about it, This was probably something that the legendary demon military advisor had calculated long ago. The Garden of Zhou was cut off from the outside world, so the human cultivators would inevitably have internal strife over magical artifacts or legacies. Even if someone succeeded in stopping the chaos, the human cultivators that entered the garden would definitely be concentrated in a few areas. As for people like Zhishio and the disciples of the Mount Li Sword sect, these must-kill targets of the demons. They would instead be more likely to act on their own. Zhishio and Qi Jian stopped at a certain cliff. They were still several dozen li away from the nearest gathering place of human cultivators, the mountainside Whispering Wood. On the slope behind them, they could already see two extremely long silhouettes illuminated by the setting sun. The demon general couple had already caught up, still carrying a pole and a large pot. It seemed like they were moving, but in reality, their speed was rather frightening. Qi Jian painfully coughed twice, his small face even paler. He reported, southwest at the Gauasian star, about 6 li, no, 5 li to them. The shadows of the demon general couple on the distant slope were like the shadow of death. They had to think of a way to escape. They've stopped. Qi Jian was somewhat shocked. Zhishio replied, they're watching to see which way we'll go. Although he could not see anything, he had followed Chun Changsheng through the mountains and fields on the outskirts of the Garden of Zhou many times over the past 2 days, so he had memorized the geography. If they still followed their original plan and went to the mountainside Whispering Wood to rendezvous with the human cultivators, the demon general couple would only need to stick to the side and pass through the forest to stop them. Zhishio fell silent for a few moments. After calculating the distance between them and their positions, he knew that it was impossible for them to reach the mountainside Whispering Wood. He faintly remembered that by the lake shore, he had heard someone say that the demons could grasp their position at any time. Even if they could not grasp their position, it now seemed that the couple truly deserved to be called demon generals. It was clearly 2 against 2, but they had actually used the art of war and formations. The pursuit and escape had already continued for a few moments, but they had not been able to take a single step closer to the mountainside Whispering Wood. On the contrary, they had been forced farther and farther away. Zhishio carried Qi Jian on his back and felt the last of the afterglow fall on his face. After a moment of silence, he turned to the southwest. He could not see, but he wanted to see those demon generals that wanted to kill him. The distant slope was shrouded in the glow of the setting sun and was currently burning. Luan and Tung Xiaoming stood in the blazing meadow, also looking at them. They stared at each other from afar. I'm going to start running, Zhishio suddenly said, calm and firm. He could not see the road, but he wanted to run. Qi Jian was very shocked. The hand that was grabbing Zhishio's shoulder subconsciously tightened. Zhishio said, you can report their position at any time and also show me the way. Right now, first tell me, how steep is this cliff in front of me? Qi Jian's voice was very weak. At this moment, it trembled even more because of his nervousness. After looking for a while, he said, it's about 43 degrees. Can you really do it? I'll definitely fall down often. I just need to get up and run. After a moment of silence, Zhishio said, it'll be very painful. Don't cry. Qi Jian softly grunted. After another moment of silence, Zhishio said, hold on a little tighter. Qi Jian softly grunted again, then tightly wrapped his arms around Zhishio's neck and rested his head on his shoulder. Having finished his preparations, Zhishio took a deep breath. The true essence in his body began to violently circulate, completely suppressing the peacock plume poison that was trying to spread from his eyes to even more places. Then he squatted down. As he moved, his knees strangely began to bend in a manner unimaginable to humans. The front of the boots on his feet split open. Sharp claws protruded from his dark wool fur and pierced into the hard rocks of the cliff with a screeching sound. At the same time, the edges of his cheeks and neck began to sprout countless coarse hairs. His eyes, because of his demonic transformation, had turned blood red, and when mixed with the green poison in the depths of his eyes, they became a very strange color. They looked like freshly ripened lemons, very sour and powerful, able to stimulate countless spirits. Afraid, he asked. Qi Jian did not reply. His arms tightened, and he leaned on Zhixio even tighter. Zhixio seemed somewhat surprised. After a moment of silence, the corners of his lips perked up, most likely a smile. If Chen Chongsheng saw this scene, he would definitely be extremely shocked, because he did not remember ever seeing Zhixio smile. Regretfully, Qi Jian's face was buried in Zhixio's neck, so he did not see. Zhixio said, "No more." Tightly holding onto Qi Jian's legs, he began to rush down the precipitous cliff. Sand and stone flew in all directions, bits of rock flying. Zhixio carried Qi Jian on his back as he madly ran through the mountains. Every time his feet fell, they would pierce deeply into the hard cliff. His grip on the ground was extremely effective. The poison of the peacock plume had damaged his eyes, but had not affected his other abilities. After his demonic transformation, the wolf youth possessed an almost perfect balance and speed. As he ran, he could use his strength and instinctively adapt to the environment. His strength had reached an unimaginable level. In just a few moments, he had reached the bottom of the cliff with Qi Jian on his back. The demon general couple, several li away, had clearly not expected them to choose this method. Chapter 268. Teng Xiaoming and Lu Wan'er stood on the outskirts of the plains, gazing at the distant horizon and the sun that hung on the ground. Lu Wan'er said, "I heard that the sun in the plains never sets, so it's called the plains of the unsetting sun. But what I don't understand is, if no one can come out of the plains alive, then who can see the sun that never sets?" Teng Xiaoming gave a simple and honest laugh, but did not say anything. He knew that his wife was not really asking him anything, but was just in a bad mood. We actually let that wolf cub run into the plains with a person on his back. Even if he dies in there, what do we do? Don't tell me we have to keep waiting? How can we be sure that he's dead? Lu Wan'er glanced at Teng Xiaoming and thought to herself, with her husband's tyrannical cultivation, if it were outside the Garden of Zhou, how could he have chased for so long without being able to catch up to a poison wolf youth? Of course, even earlier, Chen Chongsheng and the others would definitely have been killed. For the sake of entering the Garden of Zhou, the price they had paid as husband and wife was truly too heavy. Teng Xiaoming knew what his wife was thinking. He extended his hand and gently stroked her hair, comforting her, "I am willing." No one knew that the mission of the demons infiltrating the Garden of Zhou, this time, was requested by the infamous demon general couple themselves. It was because they were tired of the endless war with the humans. They wanted to leave the army and return to their fields. However, they were very clear that the demon lord would definitely not agree to their request. In the entire demon domain, only the military advisor could help them achieve their wish. So they found the military advisor, and then the military advisor requested that they enter the Garden of Zhou and complete this task. For this, they had forcefully lowered their cultivation, losing at least 200 years of their lifespan. However, if they could complete this task and return to their fields, then it was as Teng Xiaoming had said, they were willing. They were powerful demon generals at the middle level of star condensation. Even though they had lowered their cultivation to ethereal opening, they still possessed battle prowess that ethereal opening cultivators could not compare to. As people who had once climbed to the peak, they could now stroll among the hills as they pleased. Logically speaking, besides Su Yurong, they could easily kill all the human cultivators in the Garden of Zhou. It was just that they had not imagined that Nang's two maids would cause so much trouble for the sake of fighting for merit, and even more so that they had not imagined that the human youth called Chen Chongsheng would have so many precious magical artifacts on him. Even the valiant strength and willpower that Zhixio had displayed had surpassed their expectations, allowing him to successfully run into the plains of the unsetting sun. Although entering the grassland would definitely lead to death, they would not be killed by them. This was the edge of the grassland. The red sun seemed like it would never set, but in fact, it only set a little slowly. As time passed, 2/3 of the sun's surface was swallowed up by the endless weeds, and the sky grew even darker. Lu Wan'er said, "Let's wait and see how it goes. Let's eat first." Teng Xiaoming gave a very honest grunt and put down the heavy burden on his shoulders. He took out some firewood and bricks and began to build a fire. Lu Wanner took out this year's new rice and the clear spring water from Jade Spring Mountain. She began to wash the rice and cook, but when she saw the clear water gurgling out from the bottom of the pot, she remembered that this large pot had been pierced through by Chun Chongqing's sword at the lakeside. Lu Wanner stared blankly, and a sliver of anger finally appeared on her warm and amiable face. Does that kid Chun Chongqing not know that smashing the pot and destroying the kitchen is the heaviest grudge on the continent? Ting Xiaoming gave a simple and honest laugh. We want to kill him, so how could he care about such things? Lu Wanner snorted like a young girl and said unhappily, in short, I'll remember this grudge. If those two girls can't kill him, I won't let him have it easy. Tung Xiaoming comforted her. After we return to our hometown, we won't fight with people anymore. Smashing the pot and selling the iron. If we can get some money, that's not bad. Saying this, he took out another pot from the basket, took the rice from her hands, and began to wash it, preparing to steam it. What are we eating tonight? Lu Wanner asked. Tung Xiaoming looked towards the grassland and heard a faint whistling sound. He said hesitantly, there should be quite a few monsters inside. Should I go in and catch a few? I won't go too far, so it should be fine. Risking your life for food, we're not birds, and we're not humans, Lu Wanner said unhappily. She then walked to the side of the basket, and after rummaging for a long time, she found something. She picked it up and said, when I left, I brought the left attendant's left hand over. Put on the pot, steam it, and dip it in the zigung chili sauce to eat. Previously at the lakeside, in the name of fairness, she had cut off the hand of that dignified woman. That hand was currently held in her hand, and there were still some traces of blood at the stump. Tung Xiaoming took the severed hand and washed it with the spring water. He opened the pot lid, added a steamer, and found a porcelain plate and placed it inside. The two attendants are close to spiritual bodies, so the spiritual qi in this hand is too abundant. I'm afraid it won't be easy to digest. He thought for a moment and said, let's not use chili sauce. Later, add some apricot grass. He had always been the one to cook at home, and Lu Wanner was not very good at these things, so she naturally had no objections. The water in the pot had not yet boiled, and it was unknown whether the two youths in the grassland were dead or not. Lu Wanner and Tang Xiaoming sat side by side on a rock outside the grassland, watching the setting sun sink at an extremely slow speed. It's been a long time since I've been like this. 73 years ago, you were still a small soldier, so how did you have the guts to invite me to go see the sun together? I lost a bet with a colleague. Lu Wanner glared at him and said, you're finally willing to tell the truth. Tung Xiaoming thought for a moment and honestly said, I've already admitted it 441 times. Lu Wanner no longer paid attention to him and leaned on his shoulder. She gazed at the distant setting sun and said in satisfaction, it's really beautiful. Tung Xiaoming thought for a moment and decided that he should lie here. He said, Lu Wanner revealed a yearning expression and said, after returning home, we can sit like this every day and watch the sun set. Tung Xiaoming thought for a moment and felt that he could not continue lying, or else it would be difficult in the future. He honestly said, I'll get tired of it. Lu Wanner slightly raised her eyebrows and said, if you look at me for too long, you'll also get tired of it. Tung Xiaoming did not need to think and did not lie. He sincerely said, I won't. No matter how beautiful a person was, if one only looked at her beauty, then one would eventually get tired of looking at her. Chun Chongqing still did not have this kind of life experience, but he had a lot to say about things like looking at the sun, because he would never get tired of looking at it. Every day, when he woke up at 5 in the morning, the sky was still not bright. After washing up, he would stand under the plum blossoms, next to the temple, by the lake, or on the great banyan tree, and watch the sun rise as usual. This was the happiest thing for him. At night, he basically slept and was very unfamiliar with the night, and because of that reason, he did not like the night. Whether it was a fine night or a cold night, he did not like any night. Whether it was a gentle walk or an angry walk, he did not want it. He was afraid of death because he did not want to die. He was not afraid of death because he had thought of dying countless times. Therefore, before dying, he could always release an unimaginable power. The Black Dragon had seen it before. The Divine Empress had seen it before. Gohan sure had seen it before. Now, it was his enemy's turn to see that power. A sword wound had appeared on Liang Xiaoxiao's shoulder, dripping with blood. The bodies of those two powerful demon beauties were covered in sword wounds. Their faces had long since lost their smiles. Only solemnity and earnestness remained. Chen Changsheng's left hand held the umbrella, and his right hand held the sword. His face was pale, devoid of blood. His true essence had already been exhausted, but his expression was still serious. From the beginning until now, he had always been this serious. At this moment, he had to live even more seriously, to live for death to see. It's the end of the month. I very seriously ask everyone to cast their monthly and recommended votes for Heaven's Chosen Diary. Thank you, everyone. In addition, that poem used for interstellar travel, I keep feeling especially despairing. Chapter 269. Chen Changsheng's expression was serious and focused, but not at ease, because his current posture was a little strange. If he held up the umbrella as a shield and held his sword forward, then he would be a heroic warrior on the battlefield. But now, the umbrella in his hand was not raised, but dragged on the beach. The dagger was held upside down in his wrist, his knees were slightly bent, and his body was slightly leaning forward, as if he was ready to jump up and escape at any time. He looked like a thief ready to fight for his life. Because he was almost at his limit, he had no way to keep the yellow paper umbrella open for a long period of time when his physical strength was exhausted. He could only let it be dragged on the ground, and only raise it to block an attack when an attack came. The extremely sharp dagger was the same. The remaining true essence was not enough for him to use the extremely powerful flying sword technique. Even the more strenuous movements, such as slashing and stabbing, were very difficult. The dagger was held upside down in his wrist, so the sword technique he used naturally could not be grand. He could only work on the minute details. The two demon girls only realized that he was using the breaking ice sword of Holy Maiden Peak after encountering danger several times. They couldn't help but be shocked. This sword technique had always only been practiced by the female disciples of Holy Maiden Peak. So where did he learn it? No matter if it was the demon race beauty who was completely naked, or the dignified woman wearing the 7 Jian sword gown, their expressions were all very serious. They looked at Chen Changsheng with abnormally serious gazes. This human youngster was actually able to hold on for such a long time under these circumstances. It was hard for them to understand, and they even faintly admired him. But the battle would continue, and victory would forever belong to the divine race. Behind them were 2 wings of light that were about a zhang in diameter. In the next moment, the speed of the wings of light suddenly increased. With a whoosh, they disappeared from their original position, and in the next moment, they appeared behind Chen Changsheng. Their hands glowed with a strange and frightening green light, and they stabbed towards his face. Such a frightening speed, almost like lightning, as strange as smoke, had already completely surpassed the imagination of most people. How could Chen Changsheng hold on for such a long time? How did he respond? In the instant that the 2 wings of light appeared behind him, he moved. True essence surged through his broken veins. His footsteps seemed natural, but were actually abnormally precise. He stepped forward to the left, and his figure suddenly blurred, appearing several zhang away. The 2 wings of light once again moved swiftly, bringing the 2 women behind Chen Changsheng, blocking him from the lake. Chen Changsheng raised his umbrella to block. Only a tearing sound could be heard. In an extremely short period of time, it was unknown how many moves the 2 had exchanged, but they once again separated. Numerous sword marks appeared on the bodies of the 2 women once again, before gradually fading away, just like the cracks on the wings of light behind them that had been cut by Chen Changsheng. The demon beauty stared at Chen Changsheng and said with a pale face, "It really is discerning steps." Previously, they were already shocked by Chen Changsheng's strange movement technique. After a few tests, they finally confirmed it. They were Nank's mates, as well as Nank's 2 wings. Moreover, their bodies were not ordinary, so they possessed an extremely terrifying talent for speed. Just based on their short-distance jumping speed or sprinting ability, they could truly be described as lightning. Let alone ethereal opening cultivators. Even true star condensation experts would not be able to keep up with their speed. After Chun Changsheng's body had been bathed in the true blood of the Black Dragon, his strength and speed could both be said to have reached the peak of ethereal opening. However, he still could not be faster than them, but he knew the discerning steps. Yes, although his discerning steps was not complete, it was a simplified version that he had made himself. It was enough to help him avoid the opponent's lightning-fast attacks at the most dangerous moment. This was the most important reason why he was able to live until now. Liang Xiaoxiao gripped his sword and stood in the forest. Seeing this scene and hearing the demon woman's voice, his expression changed slightly. As for the two women that had competed with Chun Changsheng in speed and reaction time, their expressions became even more serious. The reason why the demon race's arrangements in the Garden of Zhou had not been completely successful was because Chun Changsheng had surpassed their imaginations. Whether it was the many powerful magical artifacts on his body, his movement techniques and sword style, or his willpower that was as tenacious as stone, the true reason why they were nervous was because of Chun Changsheng's circumstances. Whether it was that sharp sword, that extremely sturdy umbrella, that extremely rare thousandly button, or the discerning steps that he grasped, the military advisor definitely knew all of these things. But why did the military advisor not give any warning before entering the Garden of Zhou? The military advisor did not even mention it, let alone the fact that it was Chun Changsheng's secret. Even the military advisor did not know. The military advisor was omniscient, and this was the firmest belief of all the demons. Then just what did the military advisor want to do? Could it be that this conspiracy that occurred in the Garden of Zhou had even more content that they did not know? Could it be related to their master? They could not understand this matter, so they were uneasy. In reality, let alone them, even their master, even the mighty demon lord, could not understand the true thoughts of that mysterious black-robed person. They suddenly felt that the wind blowing from the surface of the lake was rather cold, and only then did they notice that the sun was about to set. But they did not receive any new orders from the military advisor, so they had to completely extinguish the 4 lights in their sea of life and kill all 4 people. Chun Changsheng suddenly rushed towards the forest by the lake. Liang Xiaoxiao's expression was grave. He held his sword horizontally across his chest, and without the slightest hesitation, he used the most powerful sword technique of the Mount Li sword sect. Previously, he and Chun Changsheng had clashed several times. No matter how powerful his sword style was, or how awe-inspiring his sword energy was, he could not stab Chun Changsheng when he used the discerning steps. Occasionally, Chun Changsheng would be entangled by 2 of Nank's maids with lightning-like speed. He would wait for an opportunity to strike, but it would be easily broken by Chun Changsheng's sword technique. Liang Xiaoxiao could not do anything to Chun Changsheng. He felt that no matter how he changed his moves, it would always be predicted by this youth. Moreover, Chun Changsheng would always use the most suitable sword technique to break them. This feeling was extremely uncomfortable and extremely terrible. This time was no exception. The dagger on Chun Changsheng's arm, within the wind of swords, easily found the final destination of Liang Xiaoxiao's sword energy. With a crisp sound, he used the simplest and most effective method to block it. Then, a flash of sword light lit up in the forest by the lake. Liang Xiaoxiao was forced to quickly retreat, and only then was he able to avoid it. The fundamental method of the Mount Li sword style was currently within the Orthodox Academy. No matter how good Liang Xiaoxiao's Orthodox Mount Li sword style was, no matter how skilled and powerful it was, how could it do anything to Chun Changsheng? He had many magical artifacts, many fortuitous encounters, but what he had the most was still knowledge. Reading through the Taoist canon was one thing, and the majority of the books related to cultivation in the Orthodox Academy's library had, in the short span of a year, become nourishment for his sea of consciousness. Countless sword manuals had entered his heart. Other than Gohan Shi and Guan Fei Bai, among the cultivators of the younger generation, who dare to say that they knew more sword styles than him. If he were to face other demon experts in the Garden of Zhou, even if it was 1 against 3, Chun Changsheng would have all sorts of treasures and techniques to protect himself. Perhaps he really would be able to kill his way out, and perhaps even obtain victory. Just like now, he had broken through Liang Xiaoxiao's mountly sword and pretended to return to the forest. In reality, he had completely ignited the remaining true essence in his body, pouring all his strength into the dagger. With a flick of his wrist, the dagger transformed into an extremely mournful and cold light, slashing towards the seemingly empty forest before him. It was a sharp sound. The two women flapped their wings of light, and just happened to appear at that place. Only a spurt of blood could be seen. On the necks of the two women, a deep sword wound appeared. If it was just a little deeper, perhaps even the bones within could be seen. The setting sun shone upon the forest by the lake. The wind caressed the surface of the lake, and the sound of waves could be heard. Chun Changsheng held the dagger in one hand and the umbrella in the other. His chest rose and fell slightly, and his breathing gradually stopped. A hint of regret appeared in his eyes. Although this strike had heavily injured the two women, it had not been able to slit their throats, so it had no meaning. Even their severed hands could be regrown, let alone the wounds on their bodies. Why did that dignified woman not have horns? Why was her blood red? Why did that naked demon beauty, when she used her bewitching technique, have the horns on her head automatically disappear? Everything was because they were not humans, nor were they demons. They were shamans, or more accurately, they were shaman spirits. Their bodies were somewhere between a real existence and a spiritual body. When they stood together, even though their facial features and expressions were completely different, they gave off the feeling of twins because they were originally twins. They were a pair of wings, just like the pair of wings of light on their backs. Those wings of light and their almost spiritual bodies allowed them to possess an unimaginable speed. Even if Chun Changsheng used the Yesher step, he would not be able to escape. If they only had a single wing, they would never be able to fly. It was just like how if they were separated, they would only be ordinary upper-level ethereal opening experts, which was why they had been repeatedly heavily injured by Chun Changsheng and the others in the center of the lake. But if they stood together, they could soar into the blue sky, their battle prowess 10 times greater than if they were alone. The reason why the strongest demon general couple, Lu Wanner and Tang Xiaoming, had left to pursue Zheshio and Qi Jian was not only because Qi Jian was their primary target, but also because this couple had seen very clearly that Chun Changsheng, because of problems with his true essence or cultivation method, was not strong enough to instantly kill Zheshio and Qi Jian. No matter what, he would still die. The pair of wings formed from clear light gently swayed behind the two women. It was a very beautiful sight. In Chun Changsheng's eyes, these wings of light were very frightening. The hand that gripped the hilt of his sword slightly tightened, trying to find a way to escape, but he could not find it. The two women lowered their heads to look at the wounds on their necks, but they could not see them, so they turned their heads to look at each other's necks, their movements extremely synchronized. Demonic green blood and bright red blood flowed incessantly from those two sword wounds. They could clearly feel the pain and the shadow of death from before. They were truly enraged, but their expressions became even more calm and solemn. The pair of wings of light suddenly began to rapidly vibrate. A gale stirred up by the lake. In the twilight, a gorgeous stream of light appeared. I'm a little hungry. I'm going to cook a bowl of noodles first. The next chapter might be a little late. I'll do my best to come out before 11:30, so as to not disturb everyone's sleep. Chapter 270. The final moment had arrived. There was no longer any meaning in hiding. Chun Changsheng unhesitatingly performed meditative introspection, igniting the last remnants of the snowy plains. But for some reason, he did not use his spiritual sense to touch the lake water outside of his ethereal palace. The snowy plains instantly burned fiercely, endlessly replenishing his true essence. Yesher's step. His figure suddenly disappeared from the forest, suddenly appearing far away, then disappeared again, reappearing again, appearing and disappearing like a ghost or smoke. But that streak of light was too fast. No matter where he appeared, he would meet that streak of light in the next moment. The sound of the sword piercing through the air constantly resounded. The wind by the lake and the sound of the waves on the lake were cut into countless pieces. From time to time, blood would splatter through the air like flowers, but by the time the flowers of blood landed on the ground, the person who had previously fought would already be several dozen jong away. Those flowers of blood were sometimes green, sometimes red. After Qin Changsheng's body had been bathed in dragon blood, it was indeed incomparably strong. Up to this point in the battle, there was not a single wound on his surface. But, although he had the protection of a yellow paper umbrella, he had still been struck by the poisonous peacock plume of the two girls several times. That sinister and awe-inspiring power had penetrated through his skin, penetrating deep into his internal organs, causing severe internal injuries. There were 2 times when he almost spat out blood, but he forcefully swallowed it back down. But this time, he had tried to take a risk. His true essence was all in the sword, causing a hole to appear in a yellow paper umbrella's defense. After receiving a heavy blow, he could no longer completely endure it. A thin stream of blood flowed down from the corner of his mouth. He no longer had the strength to hold the umbrella. The yellow paper umbrella had lost its purpose. He did not want to leave such a precious magical artifact to his enemies. With a thought, he heard a series of sounds of metal clashing and scraping. The yellow paper umbrella instantly closed, turning back into the metal ball with scales, then disappeared from his palm. He no longer flipped his wrist to hold the sword. He just casually carried it, looking like a youth carrying a bottle of wine home to drink with his adults. The sun was getting lower and lower. The temperature was also getting lower and lower. The afterglow of the setting sun in the distant plains brought the last bit of warmth to the lake, brought the last bit of wind brushing against his face. He took out a handkerchief from his sleeve, carefully wiping the stream of blood from the corner of his mouth, then put it away. The handkerchief had disappeared to who knows where. In this short period of time, the wind still made intimate contact with that blood, bringing with it a bit of smell. It wasn't the smell of blood, but something else. Liang Xiao stood in front of the forest, his sword held horizontally in front of him as he stood guard, preventing Qin Changsheng from using discerning steps to escape into the forest. The 2 women were shaman spirits, so their 5 senses were very sensitive. Moreover, they were right in front of Qin Changsheng, very close, so they could smell it. It really wasn't the smell of blood, nor was it sweet, nor was it the smell of iron in the deep winter. Instead, it was a fragrance. This fragrance was very faint, like the orchids in the deep valley, but it was extremely fragrant, as if the orchids were right in front of them. That fragrance was released by some sort of crystal-clear fruit in the process of slowly ripening. It was also like the freshness of the mountain wind blowing through the pine valleys overnight, or the saltiness of the stones steamed on the beach when the sun rose. This fragrance was incomparably complex, but also incomparably pure. It was mellow to the extreme, but also extremely clean. On that night many years ago, this fragrance had caused the countless mystical beings in the fog behind Xining village to feel uneasy. 1 year ago, this fragrance had caused the little girl next door to the Orthodox Academy to climb over the wall. Other than the night when he fixed his fated star, this fragrance hadn't appeared on Qin Changsheng's body for a very long time, even when he was bleeding in the grand examination, or when he was badly mutilated in the underground space. However, after that night, when he was viewing the monoliths in the mausoleum of books, this fragrance reappeared. It was in his blood. The closer one was to nature, the clearer one's spirit, the more they could smell this fragrance, and the more they couldn't refuse it, the more they wanted to get closer. Even Luoluo, who possessed the bloodline talent of the White Emperor family, had such a performance. How could these 2 women, who were spiritual bodies, resist it? In just an instant, they were intoxicated, infatuated, as if they had returned to the sea of flowers when they were born. The speed at which the wings of light behind them flapped gradually slowed, becoming incomparably soft. There wasn't the slightest bit of strength left. It was more like they were fanning. Chun Chong Sheng didn't understand what had happened, but he knew that this was his last chance to escape. Liang Xiao couldn't smell that fragrance, so he was very clear-headed and always on guard, quickly noticing the abnormality at the lakeside. His expression suddenly became stern. His cold sword left his hand, the most dignified and most defensive of Mount Li sword styles. The three forms of iron cliff was consecutively used, forming an insurmountable barrier between Chun Chong Sheng and the lake. He hoped to borrow this obstruction to wait for the two women to return to normal. He was very sure that no matter how much Chun Chong Sheng understood Mount Li sword styles, no matter how unpredictable discerning steps were, there was no way he could pass through the three forms of iron cliff in such a short amount of time. But Chun Chong Sheng didn't use discerning steps. The wind of the swords on the lakeside grew. The sword's momentum rose. Hanging sunset of the three forms of Wen Shui, he reversed the sword move. Using the sword as man as sword, he directly threw himself from the lakeside into the air. At this time, the red glow of the setting sun hung in the western sky. On the surface of the lake that had already become somewhat gloomy, there was still a setting sun. Chun Chong Sheng broke through the air, bypassing Liang Xiao's sword momentum, flying high into the sky, then landing on the surface of the lake. He landed on the reflection of the setting sun on the surface of the lake. Water splashed in all directions. The two women woke up with a start. Their eyes still had traces of confusion, not knowing what had happened in that moment. But in the next moment, that confusion completely turned into anger, seeing that they were finally about to kill that troublesome youth. How could they let him escape? The wings of light began to rapidly vibrate. The lakeside resounded with an ear-aching, buzzing sound. A stream of light shot straight into the center of the lake, then suddenly turned in the air, shooting into the lake. The sky had already darkened. The reflection of the setting sun on the surface of the lake had no way of illuminating a large area. The lake water that had been clear and transparent during the day had now become somewhat gloomy, especially the depths of the lake, which were even more gloomy, making it extremely difficult to see, as if it was ink. Only because of this, that distant smear of light was even more striking. Chun Chong Sheng moved his two legs, desperately swimming towards that smear of light. He remembered very clearly that this was the passage that he and Zheshio had used to come here. But before he had even swum a dozen or so zhang, a massive pressure came from the lake behind him. He didn't need to turn his head to know that those two women were chasing after him. The wings of light rapidly vibrated in the depths of the lake, like two oars that would never tire, propelling the bodies of those two women, breaking through a clear line of water, shooting towards him. The lake water was stirred into a great mess, as if it was boiling. Chun Chong Sheng knew that he didn't have enough time to swim to that patch of light. So he turned around in the water, his dagger once again grasped in his hand, his two legs quickly moving, maintaining a reverse swimming posture, simultaneously preparing for the arrival of his opponents. A faint light spread in the lake. One of the two girls was completely naked, and the other was wrapped tightly in a sword gown. They looked like two white fish, and the light wings behind them illuminated the surrounding space. They were suffused with a faint blue light and were extremely beautiful. Even at this moment, he couldn't help but sigh in admiration. That line of water continued to extend forward, quickly arriving in front of him. Chun Chong Sheng gripped his dagger and thrust forward. Unexpectedly, the dignified woman was truly enraged, not dodging or avoiding, allowing him to stab the dagger in her towering chest. At the same time, her two hands were like a lock, grabbing onto his hand. Almost at the same time, the other woman also wrapped around him, truly wrapped around him, her two hands hugging on his left arm, her two firm legs wrapping around his waist. Those two wings of light slowly closed, like a shell. Chun Chong Sheng was sealed within the wings of light, tightly pressed against those two women. If it wasn't a life and death struggle, then snuggling would be a better way to describe this scene. Close at hand. They looked at each other's faces, their slightly deformed brows in the lake water. The dignified woman had an indifferent expression. The charming woman revealed a teasing and apologetic look in her eyes. The depths of the lake grew darker and darker, the bottom of the lake even more so, like an abyss, like the night that he was most unfamiliar with, the night that he least wanted to enter. Only that pair of wings of light continued to emit light. In the icy lake water, descending towards the deathly night, Chen Changsheng's vision became somewhat blurry. He knew that he had no choice but to take the risk to do that matter. Otherwise, when his consciousness also became blurry, it would be too late for regret. He was now somewhat regretful. He shouldn't have let the black dragon leave. Although it couldn't help him in battle, it definitely had other methods in this lake. Just at this moment, he suddenly felt a sword intent. This sword intent was very faint, but very fresh. He remembered that before he came here, when he was standing beside the pool, he had also sensed a sword intent. Was it this sword intent? The 3 layers of iron cliff sword intents by the lake gradually dissipated. Looking at the lake's surface that had already calmed down, Liang Xiaoxiao was silent for a very long time. From entering the Mount Li sword sect until now, his life had undoubtedly been extremely successful. But the moment of his greatest success, in his mind, should have been not too long ago, the moment when his sword pierced through Qi Jian's abdomen. Of course, that was also his most painful moment. When was his greatest failure? He used to think that it was after ascending Mount Li, the moment he met eldest brother, because from that moment, he knew that in this lifetime, he would never be able to catch up to eldest brother. But now, he no longer thought this way. The moment of his greatest failure in his life, perhaps, was every moment he met Chen Changsheng. Fortunately, that person was dead. Liang Xiaoxiao sheathed his sword, turned around, and walked towards the forest behind the lake. He silently thought, as long as I kill everyone that came to this side of the lake, then this trip to the Garden of Zhou will be a success. The figure in the forest had already left for a very long time. His speed was very fast. It was truly an escape. However, compared to the vast Garden of Zhou, the world on this side of the lake was very small. Where could he escape to? It didn't take long before he found that person. Zhuang Huanyu had never been known for his handsomeness or elegance. His reputation in the capital mostly came from his talent in cultivation. Amongst the students of the 6 Ivies, he had always been considered an extremely simple person, but he was still the pride of the Heavenly Tao Academy. Although his clothes were simple, they were very clean, and there was no place where he would be lacking in manners. At this moment, he was in a very sorry state. His clothes were riddled with holes from tree branches, his face was covered in grass, and he had even lost one of his shoes. Moreover, he was also very lacking in manners. The questions in the book review section are still being collected. Tonight, I'll find some time to answer a portion of everyone's questions on WeChat. Also, this month's promise of 150,000 characters is only 6,000 short. Very good. I'll definitely be able to complete it by tomorrow. If everyone still has a monthly ticket, please vote for Heaven's Chosen Diary. Thank you, everyone. Chapter 271. Zhuang Huanyu had seen the cloud-piercing arrow and recognized it, so he had rushed to the lakeshore and witnessed the long-planned assassination of the demons. Yet from start to finish, he had not appeared, nor had he attacked. At the very beginning, he truly had no time to attack. And when Liang Xiaoxiao's sword first injured Zhixiu, then heavily injured Qi Jian, he did not dare to attack. But at that time, he still had some courage, because the strongest demon general couple had left. Chen Changsheng had been able to endure for so long, because he wanted to give him courage. Liang Xiaoxiao had never used his full strength in this battle, because he was wary of him. From a certain point of view, he had been useful. The problem was he had never been able to gather enough courage to charge to the lakeshore, and when Chen Changsheng could no longer endure, all his courage disappeared in an instant. He turned and left, beginning to run. This was really very rude. I've seen the 3rd monolith in the Mausoleum of Books. I've already broken through. Zhuang Huanyu held the sword of the Heavenly Tao Academy in his right hand and a magical artifact in his left. Looking at Liang Xiaoxiao blocking in front of him, he said with a pale face, I'm also at ethereal opening. I'm not afraid of you. He had also once been a young genius on the proclamation of Azure Sky. Although his ranking could not compare to Liang Xiao, in the eyes of the common people, he was as famous as the divine state's 7 laws. But the current him was covered in dirt, and his thoughts were in chaos. He did not have the slightest appearance of a young genius. Liang Xiao said, "You can attack." Even if there really was a prodigal son who turned over a new leaf, no one could turn back so quickly. Even if there really was such a thing as courage after knowing shame, very few people could see the small things under their clothes in such a short amount of time, and then become brave again. The sword in Zhuang Huanyu's hand trembled slightly, just like his voice. He could barely hold it, so how could he stab? "You know who my father is." Zhuang Huanyu lost his composure and yelled, "If you dare to kill me, you will also die." After saying this, he finally understood. The person in front of him had even dared to betray the demons, dared to even kill the last disciple of the Mountly sect master. So how could he scare him? Thinking of this, he actually became inexplicably angry. Liang Xiao was expressionless as he thought to himself, "Then, does anyone know who my father is?" Seeing that he did not respond, Zhuang Huanyu became even more uneasy. With a trembling voice, he said, "If you really want to force me, at worst, we'll just die together." After saying this, he did not raise his sword, but raised the magic tool in his left hand. Liang Xiao's eyes fell upon the magical treasure, and his expression slightly changed. He recognized that it was one of the 7 ultimate magical treasures of the Heavenly Tao Academy, the Jade Stone. This discovery surprised him, since this person carried such a powerful tool with him. If he had cooperated with Chun Changsheng previously, it might have brought about some unexpected changes. "I didn't expect Deputy Dean Zhuang to love your son so much. He actually disregarded the Academy's rules and secretly gave you such a precious magic tool." He looked at Zhuang Huanyu and said indifferently, "If this matter were to spread, what do you think the result would be?" Zhuang Huanyu calmed down a little and said, "So what? Is there anything worse than death?" Liang Xiao said, "It seems that the clue to the sword pool was also found by Deputy Dean Zhuang. He did not tell Mao Qiuyu, did not report it to the Li Palace, and only secretly told you. What kind of crime is that? Most importantly, you did not go out to help Chun Changsheng. What kind of crime is that? I think, even if you leave the Garden of Zhou, I'm afraid that the result will be even worse than death." Zhuang Huanyu's face became even paler, and he did not know what to say. Liang Xiao turned his head to look at the already calm surface of the lake. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "Chun Changsheng is already dead. Zhe and Qi Jian are definitely also dead. The only one who knows of this matter is you." Zhuang Huanyu faintly understood what he meant, but he did not believe it. Moreover, the other party's request had indeed completely surpassed his level of acceptance. "You want me to be like you?" His pale face became flushed, but it was unknown whether it was due to anger or some other reason, such as shame. Liang Xiao looked at him and calmly said, "Other than this, what other reason do I have to let you go?" Zhuang Huanyu's breathing became heavy, but he still did not know the reason. Anger, shame, or nervousness? After a long time, he absent-mindedly asked, "This just why?" This question was asked to himself, and it was also asked to Liang Xiao. Qi Jian had asked this question, Chun Changsheng had asked this question, but Liang Xiao had never answered it. Now was no exception. He gazed at the last embers of the setting sun on the calm surface of the lake, and thought to himself, how could there be so many whys in the world? At the edge of the Garden of Zhou were undulating mountains and fields, and then there were hills. 3 extremely majestic mountain ranges led to the vast and boundless grassland in the center. Sunset Valley was the longest and tallest of the 3. The cliffs were steep and smooth, as if they had been carved by a knife. There was only one path on the 3,000 Zhang mountain ridge, and it was extremely precipitous. The young girl dressed in white walked on this high and precipitous mountain path. On either side of her was the sky. She seemed to be walking in the sky. Her white clothes were like a slowly moving cloud. If she continued to walk forward, then there would be a moment when she would arrive at the very front of Sunset Valley, which was also the mountain peak that gave Sunset Valley its name. From there, she could see the setting sun on the grassland and could see the vast majority of the Garden of Zhou. But today, she would first encounter the zither-playing old man, as well as the indifferent young girl. She did not know that the old and the young were waiting for her. She continued to walk in the direction of the setting sun. The black dragon flew even higher, so it could see the girl walking on the mountain path, and it could also see the girl waiting at the end of the mountain path. Its methods had deviated from Chun Changsheng's original plan, but it was already impossible to change it. It decided to think of a way to warn the white-clothed girl. But just at this moment, within the mountain range of Sunset Valley that was enveloped by the glow of sunset, the sound of a zither suddenly resounded. This zither sound was abnormally clear and melodious, but it was also extremely distant. In an instant, it had traveled a distance of several dozen li. The white-clothed girl stopped and slightly tilted her head as if she was listening. A hint of a smile appeared on her elegant, but not particularly beautiful face. She was not vigilant, but rather seemed to be appreciating it. The sound of the zither did not stop after it began. It gurgled like flowing water, continuously forming a song. It was a cheerful song, as if it was welcoming a guest that had come from afar, but also like a hunter celebrating tonight's harvest. If the harvest was extremely plentiful, people would light a large bonfire in the wilderness and hang the food over the fire to roast until the oil flowed, allowing the fragrance to cause the fierce beasts in the darkness to salivate. The black dragon subconsciously looked towards the vast grassland. It was very clear that in those weeds that were about as tall as a human, there were many fierce beasts hidden. Then it saw that the edge of the grassland was burning. It was the final radiance and heat of the setting sun, as if it was a bonfire. Although time passed slowly, when it passed the critical point, it would often be so sudden. Without any mental preparation, the sun would completely sink below the horizon and night would officially come. The absence of the sun did not mean that there was no light. It was just that the sky and the earth were much dimmer. Just like that vast grassland that even the black dragon could not see its end had become a gloomy ocean. Looking at that grassland and ocean, the black dragon let out a faint sigh. The sigh contained a sense of satisfaction and nostalgia because it made it think of its home. Gloominess did not always represent cold. Although it was a black frost dragon, it also liked warmth. The deep blue seawater of its home, so close to ink, was warm. The blazing sun made the temperature of the seawater as suitable as bathing water, and the beaches of those islands were like silver shavings the divine empress had stripped away her soul and poured it into the jade ruby, allowing her to follow Qin Changsheng on this journey to the Garden of Zhou so that she could report on a situation at any time. From a certain perspective, she was still a prisoner. The place that imprisoned her had changed from the underground cavern of the imperial palace to a small ruin. The power that bound her was no longer those chains, but the shadow of death. She still had to face the depression in her heart and the psychological pressure of betrayal. No matter how she looked at it, this journey was not a good one. However, when she followed Chun Changsheng out of the capital, she realized that this was an extremely good thing. For the first time in several hundred years, she left that cold and lonely underground world. She saw countless sights that had already become somewhat unfamiliar, saw so many humans and demi-humans that were once her food. This made her feel incomparably happy, and she even forgot many things. Only now did she finally remember her home. Everything that could not be reached was called far away. To the dragon race, there was no place in this world that could not be reached. The name that could not be returned was called home. Yes, could one still return to their home? She gazed at the grassland that was as gloomy as the sea, and thought of the deep sea that was like a grassland in the distant south. She thought of her home, thought of her father, thought of many things, and then began to grieve. Different from the legends, the dragon race did not live in strange caves shrouded in clouds and mist on lofty mountains. As the strongest and most intelligent life forms, how could they like that gloomy and damp environment? The dragon race liked coconut winds, silver beaches, blue seas, sunlight and wind, and palaces. From this point of view, there was not much difference between any life form that evolved to the highest level. It was unknown whether the demon race's unrelenting desire to invade South and exterminate all humans had anything to do with this. The dragon race lived in the depths of the southern sea, where the seawater was very warm. That place was also the home of the black dragon. They were both of the noblest and most powerful existences in the dragon race. Unlike the golden dragon that was responsible for leading the entire dragon race, the black frost dragon was even more proud and had an incomparably cold temperament. They liked to live in solitude and were never willing to interact with other companions. To put it simply, they were incomparably aloof. Countless years ago, the leader of the dragon race, the golden dragon race, disappeared from the continent for some unknown reason. The black frost dragon naturally became the natural choice for the next leader of the dragon race. In those circumstances, as long as her father nodded, he would have become the next leader of the dragon race. But her father was not willing. Tirelessly, he left the southern sea alone and returned to the continent. The zither music continued, like a summons, like a memory, like the wind of those years on the snowy plains. The black dragon gazed at the gloomy plains, gazed at Sunset Valley. Suddenly, for some reason, she felt sorrow. Her dragon eyes filled with tears, and a light rain began to fall over the Garden of Zhou. At this moment, she was only a strand of her spiritual soul. In terms of mental strength, she was far weaker than her original body. Unexpectedly, the zither music had stirred her soul for many years, and she did not want to resist. Because the zither music made her recall the past, made her see her father after he had left her home. Her father was the most powerful black frost dragon in the past 1,000 years. He possessed a darkness even deeper than the night, and in a breath, he was like a sword of ice and snow that stretched 10,000 li. He was powerful to an unimaginable degree. Her father met a human. The human held a large blade that seemed like it could chop through the sky. No matter how powerful her father was, it was impossible for him to resist this blade. That saber seemed to be able to cut everything in front of it into two. Moreover, that great battle had taken place in the Garden of Zhou. That person was the master of the Garden of Zhou. That saber really cut through the sky here, and a clear saber mark appeared in the azure sky. With the passage of time, the slash gradually disappeared, but the plains below it began to show many strange phenomena. The sky was cut, and the darkness that was even deeper than the night was also cut in two. Her father fell from the sky, his massive dragon body transforming into a mountain range. Under the setting sun, the mountain range seemed to burn. At the very front of the mountain range was a proud peak, the dragon head. The plains would also burn. The red glow on the grass seemed like it was stained with dragon blood. The black dragon finally understood what had happened all those years ago and why her father had never returned. Her dragon eyes were filled with tears, and then they suddenly turned cold, turning into snowflakes. Humans, they really were humans. Shameless humans, cold-blooded humans. She gazed at the white-clothed girl on the lonely path at the summit and indifferently thought, "Go die." On both sides of the mountain path were cliffs, extremely precipitous. The bare stone walls seemed very smooth, making them even more frightening. Just who had chiseled out these stone steps that could only allow one person to walk. The wind here was much stronger than on the surface, and it was also much colder. Looking down, because the mountain was too high, the clouds could only be seen between the cliffs. They were unable to congregate and were blown into wisps. Listening to the profound zither music, the white-clothed girl thought of and saw a few very mundane things, like the cotton candy in the small village, the catkins hanging from the willow tree under the bridge not far from her home in the spring, and when she first entered the 13 divisions of radiant green as a child, she was not used to the thick bedding and kicked it a few times, resulting in the bedding being torn to shreds and cotton wadding drifting throughout the dormitory. Thinking of those past events, she began to smile, the corners of her lips perking up. As a result, That ordinary and elegant face immediately brightened, so much so that even the lonely mountain path seemed to warm up. Accompanied by the zither music, she continued to walk forward. There was actually a tree at the top of the cliff. She walked to the tree and rested for a moment. Because of the environment, this tree did not have a single green leaf left, only bare branches. It was very harmonious with the cliffs on both sides, as if it wanted to melt into the mountain. No wonder she had not seen it before. She took out a handkerchief from her sleeve and very seriously wiped her forehead. Logically speaking, on such a cold mountaintop, even if she did not stop walking, she should not be sweating, not to mention with her talent in cultivation. However, when she took back the handkerchief, it was actually somewhat wet. Seeing the wet marks on the handkerchief, she shook her head and then laughed again. So she could also be nervous. Putting away the handkerchief, she quietly leaned against the tree, no longer continuing to walk. The next chapter may come a little later. It is the last few hours of the month. Sky Selector is at the top of the monthly ticket rankings. Thank you everyone for your love, but the situation is a little dangerous. The chaotic monarch behind us is about to catch up. I will have to trouble everyone to see if there are any monthly tickets left. Please vote. Thank you, thank you. Chapter 272. The sound of a zither lingered around her body. She could not see the zither player. She could only hear the sound, but she did not know where it was coming from. The zither player, where was he? It was just one song. She took out a square plate and placed it on the ground in front of her. She did not know what material the square plate was made of. Its body was pitch black like pig iron, but it was a bit more gentle than iron. It was like black jade, but it was a bit more resilient than jade. The surface of the black square plate was painted with very complicated patterns and lines. If someone who understood saw those patterns, they would probably associate it with those fake Taoists outside the Li Palace who swindled money from fortune-tellers. Yes, this was a fated star plate used to calculate fate. The places where those lines intersected were the positions of the stars, and in the entire continent, only she and a few experts understood that those lines were the trajectories of the stars. Her two hands fell on the fated star plate and began to move. Her movements were very natural and smooth, like a wind summoning clouds on a cliff or a phoenix bathing its wings on the shore. With her movements, the patterns and lines on the fated star plate began to move. The countless rings rotated at different speeds, some fast and some slow. It seemed incomparably complicated. If one stared at it for a long time, their eyes would probably become blurry and they might even faint. But she did not. She calmly gazed at the fated star plate, her eyelashes not trembling. She did not miss even the slightest change in those patterns and lines. After some time, she concluded her calculations and put away the fated star plate. She walked a few steps away from the tree, unstrapped her longbow, knocked an arrow, and shot it towards the end of the mountain path. With a whoosh, the cliff in the night was roused from its sleep. The vibration of the bowstring caused the solitary tree to sway unsteadily, as if it was about to snap. Then, another long time passed. Nothing strange happened. The arrow seemed to disappear into the void. She raised her head to look at a certain place in the night sky, the place where the arrow had passed, and silently pondered for a very long time. This was her arrow. No matter how powerful the enemy was, even if it was a star condensation expert, it could not be so silent. At the very least, there should have been an echo. No echo could only mean two possibilities. Tonight, her enemy was much stronger than her, or there was a problem with the position she had calculated. The former was impossible, because this was the Garden of Zhou. Moreover, if it was a demon expert on the level of a demon general, there was no need to wait until now. They should have acted long ago. That meant there was a problem with the calculated position. She was very confident in her deduction skills. If it was really wrong, then there was only one possibility, and that was that there was a problem with the location itself. At this moment, she was just like Chun Changsheng when viewing the monoliths in front of the Mausoleum of Books. She thought a phrase. The position is relative. The relative here referred to the relative in space, the relative from afar. If space itself wasn't real and couldn't be calculated, then the position in this space naturally couldn't be calculated either. Did this lonely mountain path lead to an illusory space? Was the clear sound of the zither welcoming her into this place of death? Was that why it was so joyful? She walked to the edge of the cliff with her hands behind her back. She looked at the grassland in the distance and began to think. If the Black Dragon could see this scene, he would definitely understand why the Divine Empress doted on this white-clothed girl so much. It was because her current appearance was very similar to the young Divine Empress. But the Black Dragon could not see it. In her eyes, after that white-clothed girl walked to that solitary tree, she never moved again. She did not take out her faded star plate to make a divination, nor did she draw her bow and shoot that arrow into the night sky. It was already night in the world of the Garden of Zhou, but it was also not possible to see a sky full of stars here. It was not because the snowflakes were flying too quickly or the snowy clouds were too thick, but because the shadow that had crept over from Shuilao City had obscured the entire sky. This place was too close to Shuilao City. The terrifying demon lord did not need to leave the city to push his will into this place, transforming it into a shadow that indifferently gazed at that human. If it were an ordinary human, the moment this shadow approached, they would have been frozen into a pillar of ice, their spiritual sense destroyed, and finally transformed into dust on the snowy plains. But Suli did not, because he was not an ordinary person. There was a clear wound on his left shoulder, but there was no fresh blood. There was only a pitch-black substance that was as thick as ink, and this black liquid was still bubbling. Just what poison was this to be so terrifying? Suli gazed at the distant demon general that was like a small mountain and mocked. After so many years, you still only know how to make these petty poisons. No wonder you've only been able to add to Big Brother's feat your entire life. This demon general was ranked second in the demon army. He was precisely the incomparably terrifying and powerful Lord Haidi. Some sort of intense battle had taken place earlier, but the second demon General Haidi had left this terrifying wound on Su Li's shoulder, but he had paid an even more painful price. His right arm had been chopped off by Su Li's sword, but there was not much pain or anger on Haidi's face, only indifference. He looked at Su Li and said indifferently, "I was chopped off by you once more than 100 years ago, so I'll just need to raise it for 10 some years to recover. As for Big Brother's feet, if she was willing to let me lick them, I would have already knelt." Su Li clicked his tongue in wonder. Only you demons can be so shameless as to act so boldly and confidently. But even if you make Big Brother comfortable, now that I've chopped off an arm, aren't you afraid that third brother will take advantage of the situation and take your life, then tear you apart and eat you? The demons respected strength, so the scene he spoke of really might happen. A voice rang out in the snow. It was Blackrobe's voice. "That sort of thing won't happen, because I won't allow it, and His Majesty won't allow it either." Haidi nodded at Su Li, picked up his arm, and retreated into the distance. With each step, a crack several zhang deep would appear on the snowy plains. This was the result of his difficulty in controlling his qi after his injury. It was truly difficult to imagine just what sort of terrifying strength he possessed when he was in perfect condition. Of course, it was even more difficult to imagine just how powerful Su Li, who had chopped off his arm with a single strike, was. Although Su Li had won a battle, he had no chance, because two more mountainous demon figures were slowly approaching. They were the 4th and 7th demon generals. In order to kill this junior martial uncle of Mount Li, the demons had mobilized far too many experts. They were all true experts. This was the first time since the conclusion of that great war several hundred years ago that had cast the heavens into darkness had appeared. Su Li spat a mouthful of bloody saliva in front of him and rubbed his rather cold face. "Battle after battle. Aren't you all annoyed? Can't you be a little more straightforward?" Blackrobe began to laugh. Although his face was hidden by his hat, the smile in his eyes, which were like the deep sea, was so clear that the night could not hide it. He smiled at Su Li and said, "You're starting to panic." Su Li mocked. Only people who are truly panicking would panic and use this sort of psychological warfare. Blackrobe calmly said, "Time slowly passes. You don't know how much longer your daughter can last." So how can you not panic? Suli was speechless at these words. From the very beginning, the corners of his lips had always perked up, even in his bloody battle with High D. He had amply expressed his contempt and disdain for the demon's scheme in this world of ice and snow. At this moment, that wisp of a smile finally vanished. I bow and thank everyone for your votes. I will continue to write this story well. Although it's an old cliché, it's also the truth. Although it's still a cliché, I wish everyone a pleasant Monday at work. Chapter 273. Black Robe looked at him and said, his voice coming out of the hood like a gust of cold wind from the abyss. Are you prepared to go crazy? Suli was silent for a while. Then a smile reappeared on his face. What use is there in worrying? What use is there in going crazy? Right now, I have to think of a way to leave alive. As long as I live, she will definitely live. If I can't, then it won't be too late to go crazy at that time. Black Robe was calm and speechless. He was very clear that these words were not a threat, but a calm and objective statement of fact. If Suli was able to escape from the encirclement that the demons had planned for a long time, then if his daughter were to die in the Garden of Zhou, he would definitely go crazy. Even the demon lord would not be willing to see such a chaotic scene. So I don't have to worry about anything. Suli raised his eyes into the deep darkness and said, as long as I don't die, which one of you dares to kill her? Black Robe laughed. Logically speaking, it really is so, but I will occasionally do some unreasonable things. Suli drew back his gaze and calmly looked at him. You are the most mysterious person in the world, and also the most rational person. I don't believe that you would do such an irrational thing. Black Robe calmly explained, because I've already promised someone else that your daughter will definitely die. So, she will definitely die. Suli noticed that he was talking about someone else, a person. Who? Black Robe did not directly answer his question. He slowly said, back then, the longevity sect drowned your beloved in a cold pool. After you returned from the southern sea and learned of this matter, you angrily pulled out your sword and charged into the longevity sect. In a single night, you beheaded 17 elders of the longevity sect. Everyone knows about this matter, but whether it's the sect master of the Mountly Sword sect, the Holy Maiden of the South, or the Pope, or even the Tian High Empress, none of them can say anything to you. Because your anger is reasonable, and if you go crazy, they can't do anything to you. They can only treat it as if it never happened. Suli thought of the events of the past. His expression did not change, but a hint of loneliness appeared on his face. Black Robe continued, but have you ever thought that while these true experts did not say anything and purposely forgot about this matter, there are some very weak people who will not forget about this matter, who will always want to make their voices heard. The people you killed, they also have descendants, and those people are also loved by others. After a moment of silence, Suli suddenly said, there is no need for you to keep your promises, especially to a human. With these words, the temperature of the snowy plains suddenly dropped several degrees. This of cold signified that movement had stopped, and it signified that the sword was to sword. It also represented that, in a situation where his daughter's life was in grave danger, Suli had the thought of negotiating or even compromising. To the infamous junior marshal uncle of Mount Lee, this sort of attitude signified a compromise, a very large concession. However, he was above. As a conspirator, I know better than anyone the importance of keeping promises, especially promises to humans. Of Su, and of dragon, from a certain perspective, my promise is extremely precious because it will definitely be fulfilled. Moreover, it represents Shu Lao City's invitation to the entire world. Like black of Lee, roof, of black, of. The snowflakes continued to fall, and the cold night returned to normal. The mountainous figure of the demon general slowly came to a stop on the outskirts. An extremely clear and sharp whistle of a sword came from the night sky. Suli patted the sheath of his sword. With a light shake of his sleeve, the whistle of the sword came from the horizon. With a clang, the sword returned to its sheath, indescribably free and at ease. In the outskirts, a black figure slightly swayed, like a mountain that was about to collapse. But in the end, he managed to hold on. It was just that the spear of cold metal in his hand, with a crack, snapped in two. Su Li withdrew his sword from the night sky and conveniently broke the weapon of the seventh demon general. He was truly indescribably strong. But the demon general did not reveal any expression of panic, nor did he show any anger. He coldly said, "Su Li, you are dead today." Su Li looked at Black Robe and very seriously asked, "Am I really dead today?" Black Robe replied, "Yes, we calculated 37 times. You are dead without a doubt." Hearing this, Su Li fell silent for a very long time. He wanted to hear Black Robe's answer, because he believed in Black Robe's answer, but this was not the answer he wanted to hear. Whether it was the human saint expert or the husband and wife of White Emperor City, whether they were willing or not, they had to admit one thing. After Wang Zhiz's disappearance, the person in the entire continent who was most skilled at planning and calculating was this demon military advisor who hid his body in Black Robe. The plans that Black Robe made rarely failed, and the plans that he personally participated in had never had any problems. Back then, Emperor Taizong had led countless experts and 1,000,000 cavalry on a northern expedition to the demon territory, but in the end he had returned without any success outside Xiulao City. This person was the greatest hero of the demon race. It had already been several hundred years since Black Robe had made a special plan to kill a human expert, until now. He wanted to kill Su Li. He had calculated 37 times, and Su Li was still dead without a doubt. Then, perhaps Su Li really did deserve to die. Su Li himself also thought this way, but he did not think that he would necessarily die. In order to kill me, you've done so many things. Just which one is real and which one is fake? Do you really want to kill those children in the Garden of Zhou, or do you want to use this matter to draw me out to kill them? If even you can't figure it out, perhaps I still have a chance. All of them are real, but they could also be fake. However, killing you is the most real thing. Just like what I said before, those young people are the future of humanity, and you are the present of humanity. I am a vulgar person who lives in the present, so the first thing I do is naturally to kill you. Black Robe calmly said, "Tianhai, the Pope, and the Holy Maiden, for the sake of humanity's future, have attempted to push for the confluence of the North and South. Why has it still not worked? Why has the South been able to hold out until now? The reason is not in the longevity sect, not in scholarly manner, but in Mount Li's junior martial uncle, Su Li. So how can I not kill you?" Su Li replied, "If I die, the confluence of the North and South of humanity will not benefit you demons in the slightest." Black Robe shook his head and said, "Not wanting to be swallowed up by the Zhou dynasty, this is the thought of many Southerners. You are only the sharpest and strongest sword of the Southerners. Even if this sword is broken, those Southerners will not change their minds. On the contrary, the one who will change their minds will be Tianhai. With that woman's ambition, if you no longer exist in this world, and those noble clans continue to attempt to resist the confluence of the North and South, then she will definitely lead her army south and bring the entire human territory under her rule. It's just that the confluence of the North and South will no longer rely on the general trend, but on the cavalry of the Great Zhou." Su Li said nothing. This was a scene that was extremely likely to happen, and he could even clearly see it now. On that day, the human world will definitely be thrown into chaos. Tianhai will lead the army south, and His Majesty will lead the army south. South, south, unceasingly south, from the world of ice and snow to the warm land illuminated by the sun. That will be a journey strewn with corpses and blood. I don't know who will obtain the final victory, but this is the result that we want." Black Robe calmly looked at him and said, "So, please go to the starry sky and reunite with your family. In a few years, when you look down on this world of desolation and death, please remember to give me a greeting." Standing at the edge of the cliff, she held her hands behind her back as she gazed at those silky strands of mist. The cold wind was like a knife, but it was unable to scrape away the exhaustion on the white-clothed girl's face. She had not slept or rested for 2 consecutive days, rushing about in the Garden of Zhou to save people, and continuously using the extremely taxing sacred light technique. Even she should have felt tired. Exhaustion was not scary. What was scary was that hint of wariness in the depths of her heart. The sound of the zither, the solitary tree behind her, and the void realm that enveloped the mountain path all made her feel an enormous danger. Ever since she began cultivating the Tao as a child, ever since her bloodline had awakened, this was the greatest danger she had ever felt. She did not know the specific reason, did not know who was waiting for her at the other end of the mountain path, did not know why her opponent had expended so much effort to create this void realm to separate her from the Garden of Zhou, and just what his intentions were. But she knew that she should break open this void realm. There was no reason for this, and there was no need for reason. Since her opponent had set up a trap to trap her, she naturally had to break it. Her opponent's void realm, she naturally had to destroy it. She brought her finger to her lips and lightly bit it. Then, she discovered that she had not bitten through it, and could not help but feel somewhat embarrassed. Then, she forcefully bit down again, her slender brows slightly knitted together in pain. She looked at the bead of blood seeping out of her fingertip and furrowed her brows in displeasure. She did not like pain, and she did not like hurting herself even more. She extended her hand towards the abyss at the side of the mountain path. The dark red bead of blood left her fingertip and fell into the misty strands of mist on the cliff. As it fell, the color of the bead of blood began to change. It became redder and redder, more and more beautiful, brighter and brighter, until finally it became gold. It was just like a drop of melted gold, containing an unimaginable amount of energy. The temperature around the mountain path rapidly rose. The layer of frost that had just covered the stone slab suddenly evaporated, and the solitary tree became even more withered. The weeds that had grown from the cracks of the cliff with great difficulty were instantly burnt to ashes. The bead of blood that was like gold fell into the mist. There was only a sizzling sound. There was a burst of light in the clouds, and the clouds were like cotton wadding that was instantly ignited. In the midst of the lush mountain range, a great fire was suddenly ignited, illuminating the deep night as if it were daytime. A single drop of blood had brought about such a spectacular scene. Was this the might of the heavenly phoenix's true blood? Seeing the once again clear and bright mountain range, her face revealed a satisfied expression, but in the next moment, her brows knitted together again. She had bitten through her finger, and it really did hurt a little. She brought her finger to her lips and gently blew on it, appearing extremely serious and focused. At the same time, she softly muttered to herself, as if she was coaxing a child, "It doesn't hurt, it doesn't hurt, it doesn't hurt, be good." From the day he entered Mount Li to learn the sword, Su Li's fate was set. He had to protect that mountain, and he also had to protect the entire South. So even though he spent the vast majority of his life wandering the four seas, he would return to Mount Li every once in a while to prove to the Empress in the capital and the demons further north that the iron sword was still there. From the day her bloodline awakened, her fate was also set. She had to protect the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, protect the divine general of the East Estate, the Imperial Palace, and the Li Palace. Now, Holy Maiden Peak was added to the list. The things she had to protect were truly a little too many. In reality, in the end, it was unquestionably the entire human race. How could she protect it? Why did she have to protect it? The most important reason, perhaps even the only reason, was of course the heavenly phoenix blood that flowed through her body. Because of this, everyone either doted on her or revered her, placing boundless expectations and hopes on her. However, no one knew that there were times when she really did not like the blood that flowed through her body. That blood was too pure, too holy. As a result, in everyone's eyes, she was pure and holy. Thus, she, a person of Zhou born in the capital, had actually become the successor to Holy Maiden Peak in the south. However, she had never believed herself to be a pure and holy girl. Just like how the entire continent called her a phoenix, she felt this title to be unbearably vulgar. She creased her brow and blew on her fingertips. She looked at the faintly discernible horn of the devil in the burning mist and thought to herself, if I wasn't afraid of pain, I really might think of a way to bleed all the blood in my body dry. But could blood be bled dry? No, so she could calmly fear pain. If this was her fate, then she would first walk forward and think about it later. The mist burned away, leaving only a clear expanse. The cliff returned to darkness, but it was brighter than before, giving off a feeling of safety. She continued to walk along the mountain path. Some people's fates were not determined at birth, or when their bloodline awakened, or when they were taken as a disciple of some expert. It was somewhat sorrowful, and it was easy to inexplicably anger that their fates were determined along with the fates of others. At the peak at the end of the mountain path was the legendary Sunset Valley, the true Sunset Valley. Sitting here, one could see the mystical suspended patterns of light in the plains. The girl sat on the edge of the cliff, calmly gazing at the plains below. Her indifferent, wooden eyes were devoid of emotion. She was called Nank. She was the demon lord's 37th daughter. When she was born, the demon lord was extremely happy. Because she possessed the innate bloodline of the peacock, he named her Nank. Nank was the peacock. At that time, her fate should have been to receive her royal father's favor and then become the pride of the entire demon race. But when she was 1 year old, the blood of that girl in the south awakened, and she formally began to cultivate. Where there was a comparison, there was a difference. And she was a member of the imperial clan. Thus, pride became embarrassment, even disgrace. From that moment, her fate was finally determined. Defeat that her or kill that her. Today, I'll post a picture on WeChat. It's probably the mountain path where Su Yorong and Nank fought. I have a special love for this type of mountain path. Someone used to write something called 9 yin and 9 yang, right? TSK. I have something important to tell everyone. This month, because of the author summit that everyone knows about, I have to go out. Because of my geographical location, I have to spend more time than most authors. I will try my best to save up some manuscripts for the next few days to avoid missing chapters. If I really do, there is no other way. So, those who have a requirement for the number of chapters this month, please don't vote for Chosen Heaven's Diary. The number of chapters won't be that great. Yep, let me give you a bottom line. Although I don't have a bottom line, I guarantee that the number of chapters this month will be more than 140,000 words. Today is the 1st, which is also Monday. See you tomorrow. Chapter 274. The dark cliff, the lonely mountain path, the pitch-black abyss. Only the wind blew against her face, ruffling her black hair and the hem of her clothes. The darker the night, the more striking the white, ceremonial robes became. At the peak of Sunset Valley, the zither-playing old man slowly stroked the newly shaved fur on the zither strings. He silently thought, the first song breaks the heart, the second song breaks the soul, the third song ends, and this illusion still can't trap you? Could it be that there really are humans with pure Tao hearts? He was an elder of a tribe of shamans in the south that had been left behind. He was most skilled in spiritual attacks, and his zither music could create illusions that were difficult to distinguish between real and fake. Especially tonight, he borrowed the power of Sunset Valley in the Garden of Zhou. The illusions he created could allow intelligent beings that entered to see the most distant, most blurry, and most unforgettable fragments of the river of memories. As a result, they would not want to go back until they gradually became intoxicated, or in other words, immersed in it. In the end, they would fall into a long slumber, unable to leave. The zither-playing old man did not know that in the sky above Sunset Valley, the spiritual soul of a black dragon was watching all of this, and had been dragged into this illusion by his zither music. The black dragon saw many scenes from several hundred years ago. It was the remnant she of the dragon race that only her bloodline could sense, and it was the spiritual attack that only she could recognize from Sunset Valley's original form. Back then, when she and Chun Chongsheng stood in the mountains and gazed at Sunset Valley, she had a feeling in her heart that someone was calling out to her. Only now did she finally understand why this world could make her so sorrowful. The Garden of Zhou was not only the home of that human, it was also the graveyard of her father, the strongest black frost dragon in the past 1,000 years. The zither-playing old man did not know these things. The person his zither music illusion wanted to trap was the white-clothed girl, so the object of his attention was naturally her. He did not know what the white-clothed girl saw in the zither music illusion, but he knew that she did not waver in the slightest, nor did she sink into intoxication. She only stood quietly under the lone tree on the cliff for a while. Then she saw through the illusion and easily broke through. She bit the tip of her finger and sprinkled a drop of blood towards the world that the zither music came from. That golden, dignified, holy, and incomparably violent blood that seemed to contain an infinite amount of energy. It easily melted the clouds and destroyed the illusion created by the zither music. Was that blood the legendary true blood of the heavenly phoenix? The zither-playing old man gazed at the mountain path in the night, slightly moved. He thought, but said nothing. The entire Shualao city knew a taboo. Never mention the word phoenix in front of Princess Nank. The essence of life is desire and chaos. There is no absolutely transparent soul, and it is impossible to cultivate one's Taoist heart to be pure. On the contrary, her spiritual world is more complicated than you think. She has set up many disguises outside of her Taoist heart. Your music has only touched the most superficial layer of her. So how can it move her? There is no soul, and there is no soul. There is no soul, 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 soul. The little girl said indifferently, "Actually, I'm very curious. If she continues to disguise herself like this, will she forget who she really is one day? If that's the case, she'll encounter great problems in the future." The zither-playing old man was deep in thought. He lightly plucked the strings, and a condensed chi followed the zither music. It continued to separate the mountain range from the real world of the Garden of Zhou. The little girl had never thought that the zither music alone could trap her opponent. The white-clothed girl had used her blood to easily break through, but the illusion still existed. If she wanted to leave, she had to come see her. Come see her. The meeting of fate would happen tonight. She gazed at the mountain path in the night and expressionlessly said, "The phoenix is an insane creature. In the end, it will burn itself to death. But I will definitely let her die by my hand before she burns herself." The night wind blew across the lonely mountain path, and the ceremonial robes fluttered like a cloak. The white-clothed girl seemed to be moving very slowly, but she was actually moving very quickly. Like a crane, she arrived at the peak of Sunset Valley. There were no stars in the night sky of the Garden of Zhou, but there was a gloomy ball of light in the depths of the plain below the mountain. What was that? As she thought of these things, she gazed at the girl sitting at the edge of the cliff. The girl stood up, turned around, and said, "You came." The white-clothed girl was stunned. The moment she saw the girl, she had guessed, or perhaps finally confirmed, who her opponent was. So young, yet so powerful, it was naturally the legendary demon princess, Nank. The reason why she was so shocked was because she had never imagined that Nank would look like this. Nank was around 10 years old. Her appearance was actually very delicate and pretty, and the childishness had yet to fade. She could be considered a very beautiful girl, but the distance between her eyes was rather wide. Her pitch-black and cold pupils were somewhat slanted towards the center of her eyebrows, and the emotions in her pupils were also very wooden. As a result, she seemed somewhat dull. She was just like a girl that had grown up in a village. Every day, all she had to do was go to the back of the mountain to gather a large basket of pigweed. Then she would eat and sleep and wait until the next day to gather another large basket of pigweed. Yes, she was just a village girl. Her life was to gather pigweed every day. For some reason, the white-clothed girl believed this. Although she had never lived in a village, had never gathered pigweed, and did not even know what it looked like, she still believed this way. If this was a meeting of fate, Nank had definitely thought about it many times, and she had also thought about it many times. She believed that the Nank she would see would be a proud and aloof peacock. In all the legends, the phoenix could command all other birds. Only the peacock would forever be cold and aloof, flying alone in a place where the sun could not shine. She had never thought that Nank was like a little girl who gathered pigweed every day. She seemed somewhat dull, somewhat pitiful, and for some reason made people feel sorry for her. Every day, she would constantly gather pigweed. This made her unexpectedly somewhat dumbfounded. The night wind gently blew over Sunset Valley, and time slowly flowed by. She did not know what to say, and was somewhat nervous for some reason. She felt that she did not know how to face this little girl called Nank, so she turned to look at the zither-playing old man. She was the phoenix of destiny. She only needed a glance to see the truth. She could see that the zither-playing old man was an elder of the Candle Shadow Shamans. Perhaps his battle prowess was only at the peak of ethereal opening, but his mental strength far surpassed this level. He was most suitable to be used to kill human cultivators in the Garden of Zhou. As expected, the demon military advisor Blackrobe would not let go of any detail. Only, it was somewhat unfortunate. She looked at the zither on the old man's knees, looked at the slightly raised strings, and regretfully shook her head. This was the sacred artifact that had been passed down for many years in the Candle Shadow Shaman tribe, the Jade Zither. If this Jade Zither had not been used to set up the second layer of the illusory realm, but had been used together with Nank to attack, then perhaps she really would have been in great danger, or even died. Nank said, "If I want to kill you, no one is allowed to interfere." As she spoke, the little girl's black hair danced in the night wind, as if bits of grass were falling down. Suddenly stopping in the middle of the climax really is extremely unpleasant. These past 2 days of illness have really been somewhat unbearable. I'm sorry, I ask everyone to understand. But when I wrote this paragraph, it really was that sort of thing. I don't want to say something like heart, it should be emotion. The following chapters will probably be the greatest climax since the beginning of the book, so please allow me to slowly write. Chapter 275. Nank's expression was stern and proud, her eyes focused and serious. She looked at Su Yurong like two sharp aws. She did not speak slowly, but her tone did not rise or fall, seeming especially indifferent. She clearly had the appearance of a little girl, but she gave off a feeling of looking down on all living things, brimming with powerful self-confidence. The two most noble and powerful innate bloodlines of the younger generation of humans and demons had finally met at the peak of Sunset Valley in the Garden of Zhou. It could be said that this was fate, but it could also be said that it was the manifestation of each other's wishes. This battle was destined to be recorded in the annals of history. Before it began, there naturally had to be a corresponding sense of ceremony. Nank bowed, the white-clothed girl returned the bow, and then they began to talk. "You're Su Yurong." The night wind on the mountain was rather strong, so it was not possible to hear if the white-clothed girl replied with the word yes, but yes, she was Su Yurong. She was the reincarnated heavenly phoenix, the most promising young expert on the continent, the next holy maiden of the south, the Tianhai Divine Empress's favorite junior, the junior that Xiushan Jun admired and respected the most. And now, she had another identity that everyone knew, the fiancée of the principal of the Orthodox Academy, Chun Chongsheng. Nank looked at her, sizing her up. Her thin eyebrows slowly rose, and her indifferent face revealed an expression of displeasure and disappointment. "Those mediocre and ignorant people often compare you with me, so I can't help but be curious about you. I didn't think that seeing you today would be so disappointing." Su Yurong's eyelashes fluttered, her eyes bright. She asked with some curiosity, "How did I disappoint you?" Nank raised her hand and pointed at her, saying, "Just your current curious appearance is very disappointing. You don't have the slightest bit of magnanimity, just like a little wife. You're also not tall. I really don't know what humans admire about you. Even my elder brother treats you like a treasure." The demon young master liking the heavenly phoenix, Su Yurong was no secret on the continent, even though the demon young master had definitely never seen her. Interestingly, although the humans cursed the demon young master fiercely, they were not really angry. On the contrary, they felt an indescribable pride and joy, and this was exactly what Nank was ashamed of. Su Yurong was not angry at being described as a little wife. She only felt that it was rather refreshing. She also thought You're just a village girl who gathers pigweed every day. How are you like the sinister and terrifying Nank in the rumors? However, there was something in Nank's words that made her very displeased. Nank had said that she was not tall. This was because she was not tall, especially when she was wearing the large white robe. She looked even smaller and cuter. Suyurong thought about it, then smiled at Nank and said, "But I'm taller than you." Although this sentence was said with a smile, her tone was very serious. Hearing these words, Nank's expression also became even more serious. The indifference in her eyes was replaced by anger. Suyurong raised her head slightly, looking very proud. It was indeed something to be proud of. How is it not magnanimous? Nank's gaze moved down from her face, landing on her chest. After a moment of silence, she said, "You don't know shame, and you're not afraid of staining the blood in your body." Suyurong smiled shyly and did not reply. Nank became even angrier and said, "You disappoint me too much. What right do you have to be on par with me?" As she spoke, her black hair madly danced in the darkness, actually suppressing the darkness of the night. In the human world, the name Nank was very unfamiliar. Only important figures like the Pope and the Divine Empress knew who she was, or perhaps youths like Jashio who often interacted with demons. However, in the land of demons, this name represented strength and tyranny. Nank was one of the demon lord's youngest daughters, but this was not important. This was because in his long life, the demon lord had had far too many companions, and there were records of several dozen children. The reason why her name could be so terrifying in Shualao City was mainly because of her powerful bloodline, and because she was Lord Blackrobe's only disciple. You just broke into ethereal opening this year, but I succeeded last year. Moreover, I'm younger than you, so it's very obvious that I'm stronger than you. Nank expressionlessly said to Suyurong, "Come, let's have a fair fight. Let me prove your weakness. Let the entire continent know, between us, just who can fly the highest." Suyurong was calm and silent. As the one being challenged, she naturally revealed a certain bearing and self-confidence. The zither-playing old man continued to silently watch from the side. He did not dare to object to Princess Nank's request. Seeing this, even he, who had lived for several hundred years, felt rather stunned. Why was it that from the beginning until now, this fated battle that was destined to shake the entire continent seemed like two young girls who did not understand the ways of the world? Of course, this could not be the entire battle. In the end, a battle had to be fought to determine life and death, and then victory and defeat could be seen. On the peak of Sunset Valley, a sudden gust of wind blew, and the darkness was thrown into disorder. Nank floated up, and using the wind, her sword was already in her hand. She stabbed through the air at Suyurong. On the surface, Nank's sword did not seem special, but in reality, it was very special. This sword was very thin, but it was definitely not delicate. This was because this sword was very long, abnormally long, even longer than the ancient scholar trees at the foot of the mountain. The sword style that Nank used also did not seem special. It was as if it was a straight thrust, but because of its simplicity, it had an unimaginable power. The night wind instantly became violent, and it let out a terrifying roar as it revolved around the plateau. Suddenly, a bright arc appeared in the sky several thousand feet above the peak. In the abyss several dozen zhang below the cliff, a relatively dim arc also appeared. This was the edge of the void that the zither-playing old man had forcefully created with the sound of a zither. Such a profound void that even Suyurong could not help but temporarily stay within was actually forced out by the sword intent of her seemingly simple strike. What kind of tyrannical sword energy was this? The sword rose up from several hundred zhang away, but still arrived in front of her. Seeing this strike, Suyurong's face did not reveal any expression of shock, nor did she show any vigilance. Instead, she felt that it was natural. This was because she knew how strong she was, so she knew how strong Nank should be. She had long since prepared herself for this strike. In the instant that Nank struck, she took off the longbow from behind her and stood it in front of her. Perhaps because the strike came too quickly, She did not have the time to pull out an arrow from the quiver, so the bowstring was empty. Her two delicate fingers came together, and she gently and firmly pulled the bowstring, then released it. The entire movement was like moving clouds and flowing water, but it was also abnormally concise and clear, as if one could see every scene when it was broken down. The zither-playing old man had already stopped plucking the bowstring, and the sound of the zither had already ceased. At this moment, she plucked the bowstring, and the sound of the zither once again appeared in the cliff. A clear and drawn-out sound. Hum! From several hundred jong away, Su Yurong pulled the bowstring and shot at Nank. However, there was no arrow on the bowstring, so how could she shoot? Just as the sound of the bowstring began, the sound of an arrow resounded in the night sky. This arrow sound was very clear and even longer. It was as if it had already been silently ringing in the night sky for a very long time, and only now was it heard by the world. An arrow came from the depths of the night sky. Like a bolt of lightning, it shot towards the space between Nank's eyes. Where did this arrow come from? This was the arrow that Su Yurong had previously shot at the side of the lonely tree after a long time of calculation. Everyone thought that because of the interference of the Void Realm, this arrow had disappeared between the cliffs. Who could have thought that this arrow had actually been flying in the night sky the entire time, and only now was it seen by the world? The arrow beside the lonely tree had risen a few moments ago, and now it had landed. A loud bang resounded. The gravel on the peak of Sunset Valley tumbled, and powerful chi splashed everywhere. Even the dusky night was unable to hide the turbulence created by the collision. On the hard surface of the cliff, countless fine cracks appeared. Those cracks all came from under Nank's feet. Her feet were very small, and she wore a pair of dragon skin boots. As she stepped on those cracks that extended towards the edge of the cliff, the scene was very shocking. Those cracks represented the collision of an incomparably terrifying power. Nank did not think of this arrow, but she blocked it. Two extremely clear sword intents intersected in front of her, blocking the arrow that came from the depths of the night sky. The tail of the arrow trembled at high speed, and the two sword intents that intersected in a cross also trembled with it. The space on the cliff also began to tremble, and the light refracted and distorted. Behind the scene of chi splashing everywhere was Nank's face. Her expression was still indifferent, and her eyes were still lifeless. With a light clap, Su Yurong's arrow was shaken into countless pieces, and the two extremely tyrannical sword intents also dissipated with it. At the same time, a transparent barrier between the two also disappeared, but it was unknown whether it was the void boundary or something else. At this moment, Nank's skirt gently swayed and then turned into nothingness. In the next moment, she appeared on the other side of the cliff, several dozen zhang away from Su Yurong. The sword in her hand directly pierced forward. However, Su Yurong's speed was even faster. She did not move. Instead, she once again raised the longbow in her hand and plucked the bowstring. This time, there was an arrow on the bowstring. The cry of the arrow arose from the night mountain. Nank's skirt swayed again, and her figure once again turned illusory. In an instant, she appeared on the other side of the cliff. Whoosh! At the same moment that her figure appeared, Su Yurong's third arrow shot over. This arrow still did not hit Nank. It only hit the night wind, and then disappeared into the distant night sky. Seeing Nank's strange and indescribable movement technique, Su Yurong's face finally revealed an expression of caution for the first time. However, the speed at which she drew the bow and shot the arrow was not affected at all. Her movements were still simple and natural, so natural that it did not seem like she was fighting. Nank's movement technique was too fast. Su Yurong's archery, on the other hand, possessed the same level of speed as Nank. If a normal person were to spectate this battle, they would only see Nank disappear from where she stood and then appear in the next moment somewhere else. Similarly, they were also unable to understand what Su Yurong was doing. In their vision, they could only roughly see the arrowhead trembling in the night sky and see countless scenes of Su Yurong drawing the bow, but they were unable to see what she was doing. Only by combining all these scenes could they see the real world that only belonged to them. But if Chun Changsheng were to see this battle, he would be able to very easily understand. Su Yorong was using the icebreaker sword of Holy Maiden Peak as an archery technique, and what Nank was using was the strangest and most unfathomable movement in the entire continent, the Yesher step. What's more, she wasn't using the simplified version of discerning steps that Chun Changsheng learned through his unimaginable memory and willpower, but the complete version of discerning steps. It could even be said to be the perfect version of discerning steps. Compared to the demon elite that tried to assassinate Luo Luo in the Tradition Academy, her movement technique was many times better. Logically speaking, if one was not a member of the Yesher race, it was impossible to learn the complete version of the Yesher step, let alone the perfect version. However, Nank was of the imperial family, so she naturally possessed the bloodline and innate talent of the various races in the demon domain. From this perspective, cultivation had never been a fair matter. Su Yorong's cultivation level was not inferior to Nank's, and the archery technique that she rarely revealed in the world was even more exquisite and incomparable, conforming to the principles of nature. Facing Nank's strange and indescribable movement technique, she was calm and silent, without the slightest panic. Accompanied by the twang of the bowstring, she sent out arrow after arrow, actually preventing Nank from approaching her. But the number of arrows in the quiver was limited, and there would eventually be a moment when they were all shot out. This was reality, and reality meant that at a certain moment, it would definitely happen, perhaps at the next moment. Just at the next moment, Su Yorong's quiver was empty. She was no longer able to affect Nank's strange movement technique. With the sound of breaking through the air, Nank's figure became illusory in the night and arrived several zhang away from her. An extremely tyrannical roar exploded from Nank's petite body. At the same time, an extremely bright sword ray also exploded. The sword ray that was several feet wide came from the long sword that she tightly gripped. The sword ray drew an arc in the night sky and chopped towards Su Yorong's body with incomparable violence. This sword ray carried an incomparably tyrannical sword force and directly sealed off all the directions around Su Yorong's body, giving off a feeling that it could not be dodged. The night wind blew wildly on the peak of Sunset Valley, and the sword ray was as bright as lightning. Su Yorong's hairband, invaded by the sword intent, silently broke apart, and her black hair fell onto her shoulders. If she was hit by the sword ray, she would definitely die. How would she receive this sword? She extended her hand towards the sword ray. That hand was very white and very delicate. Compared to the violent and terrifying sword ray, it seemed so tiny and weak. But her expression was still so tranquil, so confident. Separated by the bright sword ray, she calmly looked into Nank's eyes. Her black hair lightly danced in the wind created by the sword. An invisible chi was emitted from her hand into the night. This chi was very gentle and did not have any killing power, as if it was summoning something. Suddenly, hum, 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 hum. In the night sky around the peak of Sunset Valley, countless extremely mournful cries of arrows suddenly rang out. More than 10 arrows pierced through the night sky, coming from all directions. These arrows were all the arrows that she had shot before. They seemed to disappear into the night sky, but just like the first arrow that was shot on a mountain path, they did not go far at all. They were only waiting for her summons. She extended her hand towards the night sky. Over 10 streaks of light appeared in the night sky. Like meteors descending from the sky, they shot towards Nank. Hung Hung, the greatest improvement I've made in the past few years is writing fighting. That scene, TSK, it's beautiful. Hung Hung, in the next few days, I can only do my best to guarantee one chapter. I have to leave the day after tomorrow. Excellent, excellent. In any case, what I promised was a month's worth of chapters, not months. Everyone, see you tomorrow. Chapter 276. A dozen or so shooting stars descended from the sky, illuminating the night sky. It was possible to clearly see those burning arrowheads at the very front. Nang's face was still indifferent and wooden, but her pupils rapidly contracted. Her two hands tightly gripped the hilt of her sword. She did not have time to slash her sword at Su Yurong, so she stabbed it into the night sky. Stabbing into the night sky was an action. If it was still, it would only be an image. However, her sword seemed to have stabbed into the night sky countless times. At the same time, it was also the combination of countless still images. Nank raised her sword high up, perpendicular to the night sky above her head. Her eyes stared at Su Yurong, who was several zhang away, but there were countless sword glows flashing around her body, forming an extremely perfect ball of light. There were countless fine marks on the surface of the ball of light. They were all swords. The dozen or so arrows turned into shooting stars and exploded on the ball of light between the swords. Muffled, thunderous booms continuously exploded on the summit of Sunset Valley. Countless cracks appeared on the hard surface of the cliff beneath Nank's pair of dragon skin boots, and they were even deeper than before. Those arrows were all blocked by her sword and sent flying. However, this time, they did not disappear into the night. Instead, as if they were intelligent, they attacked once again with the clear cries of the arrows. The dozen or so arrows turned into a sky full of arrows, continuously exploding towards Nank. Pa-pa-pa-pa. An incomparably concentrated sound rang out from the peak. These sounds were the crisp sounds of metal colliding. They were the strange sounds of sharpness and hardness scraping against each other, causing people's ears to ache. Countless sparks appeared on the peak of the cliff, and there were even sparks and lines. These were all the results of arrows and swords colliding. However, not a single arrow was able to approach Nank's body. Even those fleeting, faintly discernible sparks were unable to float into the ball of light formed by her swords. On the ground of the peak, there were marks made by arrows everywhere. Some were deep, some were shallow, and they were densely packed together. They were like the marks left behind by a torrential rain on the surface of the sand. She stared at Su Yurong outside of the sword glows. She raised her sword high up, as if she did not move at all. However, in every instant, she sent out countless swords. Looking from Su Yurong's position, those slender sword shadows behind Nank formed a fan shape. It was like a peacock spreading its tail. Seeing the sparks flying everywhere on the peak of Sunset Valley and hearing those tiny sounds, the zither-playing old man was moved speechless. At this moment, Nank's mind was completely focused on the longsword. No matter how powerful Su Yurong's spiritual sense was, other than controlling the rain of arrows, it was very difficult for her to launch another attack. The situation seemed to have reached a stalemate. What truly moved the zither-playing old man was the screen that Nank's longsword had opened. Only now did he realize that Her Highness the Princess had actually reached this step. She was indeed worthy of being the strongest among the younger generation of the Demon Royal family. Cultivators that had cultivated to the star condensation realm had one major difference. They had their own domain. It was their own world called the Star Domain. In the star field, no one could harm them unless the opponent had an overwhelming advantage in terms of cultivation and forcefully broke through. There was a similar saying in the demon race, but the personal domain possessed by the experts of the Imperial family was not called Star Domain, but Moon Ring. Because of Nank's age, her strength was still insufficient, so she could not summon the complete Moon Ring. However, she had used an extremely perfect and flawless sword style to perfectly make up for the deficiency in her cultivation. The sword screen that had bloomed on the peak of Sunset Valley was her Moon Ring. At this point, the zither-playing old man was finally no longer worried about this battle. Because no matter how powerful Su Yurong's bloodline was, she was still limited by her own cultivation. So as long as she remained in ethereal opening, she would never be able to harm Nank. This meant that in this battle that occurred in the Garden of Zhou, Nank was in an invincible position. The zither-playing old man thought in shock. The military advisor must have known of this matter, which was why he had unhesitatingly given the heavy responsibility of killing Su Yurong to Her Highness. His Highness's plans were truly flawless. The zither-playing old man was no longer worried, but he had forgotten one thing. Being undefeated was not equal to victory. Facing Nank, who had used her sword style to imitate the moon ring, Su Yorong's performance could be considered perfect. The perfect here was absolute perfection. Whether it was the frequency at which the rain of arrows fell or the angle of each arrow, it was all extremely perfect. Nank could only hold on with her sword screen, but she was unable to find any opportunity to counterattack. To the proud her, this was a fact that she could not accept. Her goal in coming to the Garden of Zhou was to defeat Su Yorong, to kill her. The clear sounds did not stop, the rain of arrows did not stop, and the sparks on the cliff continued to flicker. In the darkness, even further away, those streaks of light were like scars. With time, they gradually faded away, but in the blink of an eye, there were many more scars. The extremely unpleasant sounds of friction and the extremely terrifying sounds of collisions resounded in Nank's ears. She stared at Su Yorong, her expression wooden, and her dull eyes gradually sharpened. Suddenly, she closed her eyes, and with a hint of madness, she gave a loud shout. Ah! With this shout, the sword glow around her became even brighter, and the energy of her sword suddenly increased by 30%. With a series of claps, her figure suddenly became illusory and then became solid again. She passed through her own sword screen, and her sword stabbed straight at Su Yorong. She actually did not care about the rain of arrows. She condensed all her cultivation into a single sword and wanted to cut down Su Yorong. Even if her sword landed, those streaks of light would still inevitably stab into her body. This battle had actually reached its most dangerous moment so quickly. The zither-playing old man's expression suddenly changed, and he suddenly stood up from the zither. For a demon princess to risk her life with this sword, just how powerful was it? Nank's sword had 2 rays of clear light. The 2 sword glows intersected and slashed at Su Yorong's face. The zither-playing old man's face paled slightly, and he shouted in shock, "Southern Cross Sword!" In the human world, one could not see the demon moon. In the demon realm, one could see the starry sky above the heads of the humans. But because of their position or some other reason, the starry sky in the eyes of the demons was not a sky filled with stars, but 2 belts of stars like the Milky Way. These 2 rivers of stars intersected in the night sky, just like a cross. Compared to Shuilao City, the starry sky was in the south, so the demons called it the Southern Cross. The sword that Nank slashed at Su Yorong was divided into 2 streaks of starlight. It was the extremely famous Southern Cross sword of the demon realm. The zither-playing old man also knew that Princess Nank's longsword was the famous Southern Cross sword. One sword was the sword style, and the other was the body of the sword. Nank used the Southern Cross sword to execute the Southern Cross sword. The powerful sword intent pierced through the air, but before it even reached Su Yorong's body, countless tiny cracks could be heard in the distant night sky. A sliver of pain flashed across the zither-playing old man's pale face, and his body swayed. This was the sound of the void shattering. Soon after, in the distant plains at the foot of Sunset Valley, that strange suspended light also began to flicker. The light that was cast here was slightly deformed, proof that space was being twisted. Nank's sword had already reached the peak that the laws of the Garden of Zhou allowed, and was even about to cross that boundary. The 10-odd arrows transformed into streaks of light, piercing through the darkness at high speeds. To the naked eye, it was like a majestic rain of arrows. Nank released the moon ring and transformed the sword screen into a single sword. This was equivalent to exposing herself to this terrifying rain of arrows. If Su Yorong could receive this terrifying Southern Cross sword, then it would be Nank's turn to face the greatest danger. The problem was that the Southern Cross sword's power was so terrifying, and the Southern Cross sword in Nank's hand was an illustrious weapon of the demon domain. In the human world, it was completely qualified to be ranked on the tier of legendary weapons. Su Yorong only had a wooden bow in her hand, so how could she receive it? With the sound of a zither, the bowstring broke. The bowstring broke at the end, curling up like the pistil of a flower, and fell on Su Yorong's wrist. She gripped the bough and stabbed it into the cliff in front of her. With a muffled crack, the cliff suddenly shattered and the longbow stabbed into the ground. It swayed in the night wind, as if it had become a tree. A loud bang resounded. The incomparably terrifying Southern Cross sword chopped at the longbow. This bough was very long, so it did not feel very sturdy. It was also clearly made of wood, but it still managed to block this sword. On the smooth cliff peak, this tree was assuredly lonely, just like the tree she had seen on the mountain path. The mountain path was an illusion. The tree she had seen was the tree she wanted to see. The tree she had seen on a mountain path was a wudong tree. The longbow now was also a wudong tree. This bow was originally a divine weapon on the tier of legendary weapons. The wutong was the powerful magical artifact of Holy Maiden Peak. In the tier of legendary weapons, it was ranked 31st and 32nd. Why did a magical artifact have two rankings? Because the wudong was not a single magical artifact, but two. Those arrows whistling through the night sky were the leaves of the wutong tree. They were called the wu arrows. The longbow in her hand was the sturdy trunk of the wutong tree. It was called the solitary tree. The wu arrows and the solitary tree. My sword, the solitary tree. This was a ruler's weapon. Unless one was a saint or a monarch, they could not use it. But Su Yorong could use it. In fact, only she had the ability to display the greatest power of this magical artifact. It was the same reason why the solitary tree she had seen on the mountain path was a wudong. She was a phoenix perched on a wudong. She was a natural ruler. The clear light was like a wave smashing against a reef, scattering in all directions. The collision of two powerful chis illuminated the peak of Sunset Valley and also illuminated each other's eyes. Su Yorong looked at Nank with a tranquil expression. She did not say anything, but she was strong. The solitary tree had blocked the Southern Cross sword, but where were the wu arrows? The sound of air being torn apart rang out in the darkness. Countless arrows rained down on Nank. Nank's sword clashed against Su Yorong's longbow. How could she avoid this rain of arrows? Just like what was said before, if she could not end this battle with a single strike, then it was her turn to face absolute danger. Just at this moment, an unexpected scene appeared. Nank's two hands holding the hilt of her sword crisscrossed. One sword blocked Su Yorong's longbow, while the other swung out. The sword screen reappeared, completely blocking the 10-odd wu arrows. The Southern Cross sword was actually two swords, just like the wudong was two magical artifacts. Tonight, the peak of Sunset Valley was overflowing with light and color, and clear cries constantly rang out. This was an unimaginable battle. In terms of intensity, it definitely could not compare to the heaven-shaking ambush outside the Garden of Zhou that was rarely seen in 100 years, but it was even more mesmerizing. Just like the rumors said, whether it was in terms of cultivation or willpower, they were extremely similar. Even their weapons and techniques were very similar. Just as imagined, they had finally met and then fought. The phoenix and the peacock, the wudong and the Southern Cross sword. Who would obtain the final victory? If there was fate, then they were fated opponents. Anyone who saw the battle tonight would firmly believe it. If no one saw this battle, then it would be the regret of the entire continent. Fortunately, there was a spectator to this battle. Every wrinkle on the zither-playing old man's face expressed shock and admiration. It was not only for Nank, but also for Su Yorong. He had never seen such powerful bloodlines and battle prowess, let alone the fact that they were still so young. The wu arrows met the sword screen. The Southern Cross sword met the solitary tree. Now, the battle on the cliff had once again entered a stalemate. It all depended on who could last until the end. The zither-playing old man was very clear on this point, so he stood up in admiration. A fair battle? It was just like how the demons did not believe in the tears of humans. That was a very hypocritical word, without any meaning. However, Nank glanced at him. Although it was only a glance out of the corner of her eye, it was still colder than snow. The demons did not believe in fairness or justice, but she believed in pride. As a result, the zither-playing old man retreated. The peak of Sunset Valley remained bright from beginning to end. It was the sparks from the friction between the arrow and the sword. The flowing light formed from the collision of the chi between the sword and the bow. Amidst the sparks and flowing light, the luster on Su Yurong's ordinary and delicate face grew brighter and brighter, calmer and calmer. It represented confidence. A dignified chi emanated from her white, ceremonial robes, incomparably bright. Nang's gaze was still somewhat dull, but it grew fiercer and fiercer. Because it grew more and more focused, it grew colder and colder. Suddenly, a clear whistle burst out from her lips. That voice was somewhat immature, but it was incomparably proud. It symbolized unruly and haughty arrogance. It was a peacock that stood alone in the depths of a swamp. It looked at the hundreds of birds flying into the distance and cast a disdainful glance. Noiselessly, a stream of blood flowed from her hands, covering the hilt of the Southern Cross sword. The blood that flowed from her was not red, because she was not human. However, it was not the green of ordinary demon blood either. Her blood was multicolored and incomparably mottled. This blood was not disgusting. On the contrary, it possessed a bewitching beauty. The stream of blood seemed very cold, like flowing ice. It slowly covered Nang's hands and the hilt, and then it began to burn. However, the flames also seemed to be cold. The icy flames began to fiercely burn on the Southern Cross sword. In just an instant, the Wutong bow was covered in a layer of ice and snow. A moment later, actually produced several icicles. The place where the bow was connected to the cliff began to violently tremble, producing several cracks. It seemed as if it could not endure it any longer. Was this the true blood of the surpassing bird? Su Yurong silently pondered. Then, the tips of her brows slightly furrowed. It was not vigilance or unease, much less fear. Rather, it was a fear of pain that had begun prematurely. Bleeding really did hurt a little. She did not like pain, so she did not like this method of battle. However, since Nang had already extended an invitation to her, she could not refuse. This was because she disliked defeat and death even more. Because of the pain, her brows furrowed more and more tightly. She seemed rather pitiful, but her eyes grew brighter and brighter, her expression calmer and calmer. A stream of blood slowly flowed from her fingers, dripping onto the bow that she tightly gripped. The blood was red because she was human. However, in the instant it came into contact with the night wind, the blood turned gold. The blood seemed to be flowing gold, incomparably dignified, incomparably pure. It seemed to contain an endless amount of energy and heat. Just like that, the Wutong bow began to burn. The ice and icicles were instantly purified into smoke. It's been 4,000 characters for the past 2 days, because it's much more beautiful and appropriate for the plot to end here than 3,000. Yes, then the problem is, what do I do without a draft? Tomorrow, I have to fly to Shenzhen. I'll leave at around 6 in the morning, and hopefully arrive at the hotel around 6 in the evening. China is just this big, and us Northeasterners are just this willful. I'll go write something first, and then adjust it according to the updates of the next few days.